Hello, welcome to the Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. If you are watching this YouTube video or listening to this podcast, then I am live with the Twitch chat, and we are about to walk through and talk through the new Seraphon Battletome, which has been released in 2023. Now, the pictures that I'm going to show you, and here's an example now, here, are photos, or as we call them, potato photos, and they are of the book that's about to be put on pre-order this weekend, and therefore it's technically a leak. But every element of this book has been photographed and put into order, and we're going to break through all of it and talk through all of it, hopefully in a way that makes sense to you, and you can learn a lot and hopefully enjoy this review. If you do like it, then obviously please do like and subscribe, and also you could support me by joining Patreon. There's the pitch before I speak to you probably for the next 2 hours about dinosaurs and whether chairs are real, because there's and bites and all other things. So thank you to Obi Watts for donating £5, saying hello to YouTube. So the Twitch chat who are joining me right here, you can see them here. They're all really excited that you're watching this, so that's really fun. So do leave some comments because they do love it. Okay, we're going to talk about the battle traits. Really quickly, if you build a Seraphon army, there are two main ways that you can play this army, or two ways only. There's Coalesced, and the narrative for this is that they're dinosaurs, definitely, and they're ruled by magical frog people, or specifically Lord Kroak, but we'll get onto that in a bit. But they're magical frog people, but there's either dinosaurs that live in space that are thought demons, or there are dinosaurs that are more like just live on the ground, kind of your working class dinosaur who are spawned in pools and other things like that. And so those are the ones we're going to look at first, or the Coalesced, as they say. So the Coalesced constellation. So what this is, so you're either going to play Coalesced, which is this, or Starborne, which is the other one. That's the thought demons who live in a spaceship. More on those later. And if you do play Coalesced, there are two sub-factions that you get to pick as well. So when you do pick Coalesced, all of your units in the Coalesced will get these rules if I say that they can get the rules. That makes sense. You probably know how battle traits work, but it's worth just explaining it again. So you basically start the game by saying, I'm going to have a Coalesced army. Then you start writing your list. That's how you start writing your list. Easy. Okay, so what rules do you get if you're running a Coalesced army? Okay, first one, you also get to pick a sub-faction, Koatl's Claw or Thunder Lizard. We'll talk about those in a minute. But doesn't matter which one of those two you pick. If you're playing Coalesced, you get Predatory Fighters, which is add one to bite rolls made for Coalesced Saurus and Coalesced Kroxigor units with the Mighty Saurus Jaws, or Vice-like Jaws ability. Now, there's some really important things to talk about here, because you're going to look at this and you're going to think, oh, Rob, okay, so it's only going to affect Kroxigor or Saurus, as in the 10-man or 10-dinosaur unit of Saurus. Actually, it's the Saurus keyword. So if you take the new Saurus that are riding on dinosaurs, or Saurus on Carnosaur, then that's also going to apply to them if they have the Mighty Saurus Jaws, or Vice-like Jaws ability, which they don't, because basically all of the mounted units don't have it, which I know is weird. So what you'll have is an Oldblood on foot, or like a Saurus Oldblood on foot, or like a carriage on foot. They'll definitely have that ability, but the Saurus on Carnosaur won't have that ability. So no bites for you. But it'll say on their war scroll basically which one it is. And the ones that it definitely affects are Kroxigor, Saurus Warriors, and then the Saurus Heroes on foot are the ones that it definitely... Oh, and also Saurus Guard. Those are the ones it applies to, which is good. They do mortal wounds on 6s for each model in the unit. That's incredibly complicated. Okay, you got a unit of 10 Saurus Warriors. Perfect. At the end of the combat phase, each one of those models in that unit that's within 1 inch of an enemy unit, and let's say it's all 10, get to roll a dice. On a 6s, they do mortal wound. That's the jaw attack. Predatory Fighters makes it happen on a 5. That's what that does. And then if you're near your Realm Shaper engine, it's going to happen on 4s. Super easy. No problem. It's not a massive buff, but it kind of is in the right situation, which we'll talk about at the end. And then we've got Scaly Skin. Okay, subtract 1 from the damage inflicted to... Subtract 1 from the damage inflicted to a minimum of 1 for each successful attack that targets a friendly Coalesced unit that has a Saurus, Kroxigor, or monster keyword. Now, unlike the previous ability, this will affect all of the Saurus units. So this will affect the Saurus on Scarver. This will affect the Saurus on Carnosaur. This will affect the Saurus Scarver on his new mount. So Scaly Skin's actually incredibly good. So this is a massive defensive buff, which when you read the War Scrolls and the points, won't make it look like it's really, really good. I don't know if it's as good as a 5-up ward save, which a lot of the other armies are getting, but it's definitely very, very good. But it's obviously worse into 1 damage weapons. So if there's a bunch of damage 2 out there in the world, in the game at the moment, then this is incredible. But if everyone's just doing damage 1, then it's not as good. It only affects your Saurus, Kroxigor, and monster. So you're not going to take Skinks in this, and it's not going to help your Slann out, but it is going to help those. So what you're really seeing here is that they want you to collect Saurus in this army, or they want you to collect Kroxigor in this army, basically. So pretty good. That's a great damage reduction. And then you've got the Beasts of the Dark Jungles. So these are monstrous actions which happen at the kind of start of the combat phase, done by a monster. Each monster is able to do a monstrous action. You can't do the same monstrous action more than once, and there are like some simple ones. Roar, it happens on a 3-up, means you can't issue or receive a command ability, which is brilliant. Yeah, absolutely great. That's probably the most effective one because of economies of scale. But the Stomp is really nice. Don't hate that. That's pretty good as well. This introduces more monstrous actions that you can do, but only for specific units. So you've got one for a Carnosaur, a Stegadon, a Troglodon, and a Bastiladon, which is pretty good. So the Carnosaur is Gargantuan Jaws. Only Carnosaur can carry out this monstrous rampage. Pick 1 enemy model within 3 inches of this unit and roll a dice. If the roll is greater than the model's wounds characteristic, it's slain. Now, you obviously want to try and just eat like a hero that's got 5 wounds and roll a 6. Amazing. But a really cheap and effective way of using this is picking out command units in enemy units. So like a command model, in enemy units. So either the champion in a unit or the musician or the banner bearer that does something really useful to the unit. The wizard out of a unit as well is really nice if you get to do that. So that's actually quite a good one, and I quite like that. Then you've got, but the Carnosaur itself, when we get to the Carnosaur, is pretty mid, so you might not take that. Then you've got the Earth-Shaking Charge, only a Stegadon, that has made, and don't forget that's keyword Stegadon, so that's also going to apply to the Skink Chief on Stegadon and also the Engine of the Gods. That has made a charge move in the same phase can carry out this monstrous rampage. Pick 1 enemy unit within range. On a 4+, the strike last effect applies. This is pretty good because striking last is really positive in a combat orientated army, but it's on a 4+, so it's really unreliable, so it's not worth taking a Stegadon just to make strike last happen. Then you got Odious Roar. Ooh, only Troglodons can carry out this monstrous rampage, and the only Troglodon you can take is a Skink Oracle on a Troglodon. More on him later, but you might see him in quite a lot of lists because his ability to cast spells through him. On a 2+, at the end of the following combat phase, the range of this unit's death stench is 12 inches, not 9 inches. So this is any units within 9 inches are -1 to hit, but you can push this up to be 12 inches, and it's not units wholly within, it's just a unit within 9 inches. So that means you don't have to have, it's not the model, it's the unit, so that's wicked. So a -1 to hit aura coming from like a big monster is quite good, especially that monster, because all of these monsters are going to be -1 damage thanks to Scaly Skin. And then finally you got Bludgeoning Sweep. Only a Bastiladon can carry out this monstrous rampage. You pick 1 enemy within 3 inches of this unit, and it's not a monster, and you roll a dice. If the roll is less than the number of models in the enemy unit, therefore you can't do this to a unit with only 1 model, because you can never roll less than a 1. So if you pick a unit of 10, you would roll a dice. If you roll a 5, you'll do 5 mortal wounds. If you roll a 2, you'll do 2 mortal wounds. Super simple. Really easy. So the monstrous rampages are kind of okay. They're not a big deal. The best monstrous rampage probably in the game is the Frostal and Stonehorn's ability, or just the Stonehorn's ability to run around and do stuff. It's probably the best one. But this is pretty interesting. This Troglodon one's really nice, probably because you'll see him a lot. And I really like the Bludgeoning Sweep on the Bastiladon, mainly because we want to take 4 Bastiladons later. That'd be quite fun. So, the 2 sub-factions that you can take are Koatl's Claw and Thunder Lizard. So what do? Well, Koatl's Claw adds 1 to the wound rolls for attacks made by melee weapons by friendly Koatl Claw Saurus or Kroxigor units that have made a charge move in the same turn. This is good. No, not good. This is great, because this is an economy of scale on every unit in your army, because you're running Koatl's Claw. And then as long as you don't be silly and take Skinks, this is going to affect most of your units. So it's a massive buff. Most of your units wound on a 3. So this means you're now going to be wounded on 2s. And then with things like all-out attack, this means you're probably, on some profiles, going to be on 2s and 2s, which is incredibly effective and efficient. So, but this is only going to happen on the charge, so that's something to be conscious of. But when we get to like the command traits later, you'll see that we're going to be able to get charging easier in this army. So Koatl Claws is my preferred one. Thunder Lizard. What you get is the Mighty Beasts of War, and at the end of the charge phase, you can carry out 2 monstrous rampages with each friendly Thunder Lizard monster instead of 1. Now, I personally don't think this one's particularly great, because the monstrous rampages are just not very, very effective. So this probably wouldn't be one I take. The other things are Koatl's Claw, you get the Kroxigors being battle line, which is very, very good, because that means normally you can only reinforce a unit from its minimum size, so like 3 to 6, reinforce once. But battle line units can be reinforced twice, so you can take it from 3 to 9. So then you can have a big, beefy unit of Kroxigor, which is quite cool. With Thunder Lizard, you can have Stegadons as battle line. And Stegadons are pretty fun. They're quite interesting. I wouldn't say that it's really worth having them as battle line. They're not the same as Stonehorn Beast Riders, which you see from Ogre Moor tribes, which are very good as battle line. But my preference is Koatl's Claw, mainly because lots of the buffs in the book are going to apply to the Saurus and the Kroxigor a lot, and almost none of them are going to be buffing the monsters. The monsters don't really get any buffs in the book, whereas all of the buffs apply to Saurus or Kroxigor. So just take the Kroxigor, basically, or take the Saurus. That's the long and short of it. So those are the sub-factions. The next part is the command traits. So when you pick a general in your army, and you can only pick one general, in most cases, when you pick a general, they're allowed to have a command trait. So you have one command trait and it affects all the units in your army, or it affects that general, basically, depending on what the command trait is. The first ones, the Lords of the Temple Cities, are only going to apply to Slann. There's only one Slann that you can take. Lord Kroak is a special character who can't be given a command trait, so it's just going to be on the generic Slann, as they say. So what do you get? Okay, and the Slann, just as kind of quick TLDR, is a like frog wizard whose main job is as a support caster, not as a fighter in any way. So that's what it's going to be on. So you're not going to be looking for like a combat buff really on a Slann. So you got the Wrath of Eons. This is the first command trait. Once per battle at the start of the combat phase, you can say this general will rouse the wrath of the Seraphon. If you do so until the end of the phase, add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by friendly Saurus and Kroxigor units where they're wholly within 12 inches of this unit. Now this is kind of the first indication that you're going to get that specifically this book, or this part of this book, is geared very heavily towards Saurus and Kroxigor. This could have been bonuses to monsters as well, because this is kind of like the monster / Saurus subfaction, but they didn't give you that. So that's going to be a good indication that we're always going Saurus and Kroxigor along this line, or Saurus keyword, and Kroxigor. And as a buff, it's actually pretty good. +1 attack is really nice. Obviously, you would like it to not just be once per battle, which normally makes an artifact something I don't really want to take. But in the right situation, like we would call it like a pivot moment in a game, you would take a very buffed up unit, let's say 9 Kroxigor as an example, and then if you give them all +1 attack, then you would really stack how many attacks they're going to have for that individual fight. So if you were looking to take down an incredibly tough target, like let's say Archaon is a really good example, then what you would want to do is at that moment ping off all of the abilities to absolutely nuke something. Really good, especially into armies with really good recursion. So like OBR, who can heal a lot of models back. So might not be perfect in all situations, but is actually really effective if you think about the timing and you think about having this one big, massive smash turn. So kind of okay. I quite like that one personally. But it is once per battle. So there we go. Custodian of the Divine Technology is quite fun. You pick 2 artifacts from the Treasures of the Temple Cities, which is on the next page. We'll talk about those in a minute. And these are not the same as the free artifact you get in your army. You normally get a free artifact, 1 artifact in your army. This now lets you have 2 more on 1 unit, which is pretty cool. So I like that. That's very fun. And then you've got Master of the Material Plane. The general knows 2 extra spells from the Lore of Ancient Domains. Now, the Slann, even though the Slann's entire background is a wizard who contemplates the nature of the universe and sits in a throne and is just a magical being, for some reason isn't a lore master. So needs to take some lessons from the OBR wizards. And this allows you to know 2 extra spells from the spell lore. Normally, when you have a wizard, you take 1 spell from the spell lore per wizard you have, and it's written on that wizard's profile. So if you've got a Slann, he'll know a spell. That's it. If you have another Slann, they'll know another spell. And they can only cast that spell that they've chosen from the spell lore. But this lets you know 2 extras, which is good. And we like that. Then Dominating Mind. Once per turn at the start of your hero phase, you can pick one for any Coalesced monster unit on the battlefield and say that it will have its mind dominated by this general. If you do so, you roll a dice. On a 2+, you add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by melee weapons by that unit until the start of the phase. If that unit has already got a rider, there's already got a rider, then it only affects the unit's mount and not the man himself. So this is for your, like, I would say fairly classic monster pegging situation. This is +1 to wound. It happens on a 2+, but it is once per turn. I don't overly love this, so I wouldn't take this if I were you. But ultimately, you get to look your opponent in the eye and tell them you're about to dominate your own dinosaur, right? So, that's fun. Anyway, now, so those are the command traits for the Slann. The command traits for the Saurus are Prime Warbeast, which is a unit with a mount only, and you get to add 1 to the attacks characteristic of the weapons used by the general's mount, which, it's pretty good. Yeah, +1 attack is pretty nice. You've got the Thick Scaly Hide, add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target this general, which is okay. But none of these are as good as the Vengeful Defender, which is the real one that you're gonna love. At the start of your hero phase, if this general is wholly within your territory, you pick this general and up to 2 other friendly Saurus or Kroxigor units wholly within 12 inches of this general, and each make a normal move. Now this is fantastic because this means turn 1 in the game, you can take one of your units and you can move them in the hero phase and then move them in the movement phase. And this is going to be really effective as there's also like a run and charge spell, which we'll get to in a bit as well. So this means you can move Saurus 10 inches, which is quite nice. And if they do run and charge, it's going to be 16 inches and charge. Kroxigor, I think this means they're going to move 10 inches as well. And again, with a run and charge. The Slann has got an ability to make units fly. So then they can move twice, run, charge, fly, and charge. So you can do some really fun stuff with that. And again, like I spoke about before, this only affects Saurus and Kroxigor. So pretty good. So those are the command traits and the artifacts. Next up are the artifacts. So your heroes can take artifacts. You normally get one for free in your army. So what do you get? Treasures of the Temple Cities. So for a Slann, you get the Throne of the Lost Gods. This does not give him legs, which makes him a lore master, unfortunately. But what it does do, it adds 4 inches to the bearer's move characteristic and +1 to the bearer's wounds characteristic. Now, there's some positives. Plus movement is always great in the game. However, the +1 to wound takes it from 9 wounds to 10 wounds, which means he's no longer a galley champ in the current GHB. But also means that he doesn't interact with wildwoods particularly well. So it's actually generally a negative, that one. So I wouldn't probably take the Throne of the Lost Gods. Crystalline Skull is quite a cool and unique artifact because you can actually model it on the new Slann model, which is quite cool. The bearer starts with a power reserve of 0. Yeah? Each time the bearer successfully casts a spell that is not unbound, increase the bearer's power reserve by 1. Once per battle, in your hero phase, you can say the bearer will shatter the Crystalline Skull. And if you do so, you pick one enemy unit within range, or within 12 inches of the bearer, and roll a number of dice equal to the power reserve. For each 3+, the unit suffers a mortal wound. Not very good. Like, you got to cast a lot of spells. Like, it caps out at an incredibly low value. Not good, but very fun to have a crystal goblet that you just keep filling up with little like trinkets. So maybe quite fun. The Ixty Grubs is pretty good, which is at the start of the hero phase, you can heal 1 wound allocated to the bearer. We like that. In addition, in your hero phase, you can reroll 1 casting roll or 1 dispelling roll for the bearer. And in the enemy hero phase, you can reroll 1 unbinding roll for the bearer. Okay. This is pretty good. This is like the Master of Magic command trait that you can take which is good, but it has an additional value in that you get to heal 1 wound as well, so that's really positive. If you're going to go for a lot of spell casting, I'd probably take Chronomantic Cogs, because you've got so many spells that you cast in this army that the 70 points is worth it, which is the Endless spell, which lets you reroll cast spells. But like, it's pretty good. Like, it's legit. I think that's a pretty good one. Then you got Koatl Familiar. Once per battle at the start of your hero phase, you can say the bearer will be blessed by Tepok. If you do so, the bearer can attempt to cast 1 additional spell in that hero phase, and that spell can be any spell from the lore of ancient domains. This is okay, but XD Grubs is just better, so I'm not going to take that. So it's just that easy. If you're running a Saurus, you can take some artifacts. You get Sotek's Gaze. Enemy models with a wounds characteristic of 1 or 2 cannot contest objectives while within 6 inches of the bearer. This is awesome. Really good. Shut down your opponent's ability to score is very good. It's models though, so that's a bit challenging because it's only models within 6 inches, but you might be able to make it so loads of the enemy can't contest objectives and you can contest them instead without ever having to fight them, which is a massive positive. So that's a good one in my opinion. You got the Blood Rage Pendant, which is add 1 to the attacks characteristic of the bearer's melee weapons. If the number of wounds allocated to the bearer is equal to or greater than half of the bearer's wounds characteristics, add 2 instead, which is kind of okay. You can make like a fighty character, but personally that's not one I overly like. And then you got the Blade of Realities. Pick one of the bearer's melee weapons, improve the Ren characteristic of that weapon by 1. In addition, add 1 to the damage inflicted by each successful attack made with that weapon that targets a hero. The real question is, with the Blood Rage Pendant or the Blade of Realities, is can you build an incredibly fighty, damage-dealing melee character out of the Saurus in this section of the book? And the answer is, having run the numbers a little bit, I don't think so. Not as scary or fighty as, let's say, a Frostlord and Stonehorn, which is probably a comparison. You could definitely make something, but I don't think you can make it as much. So I'd probably be more interested in the Sotek's Gaze, my opinion. Now we get to the spell lore. And again, this is the spell lore that only applies to these sub-factions. So we've got the Earth Trembles. The Earth Trembles is a spell that has a casting value of 8, and if successfully cast, pick 1 corner of the battlefield and draw a straight line between the corner and the closest part of the caster's base. Roll a dice for each enemy unit passed across by that line, and a 4+, the unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. This is incredibly good if you get the right setup. It's just kind of like if you get the perfect shot where you can just line up all the units in one big go, this is really, really effective. As we know, or as we get to when we talk about Lord Kroak, who's one of the Slann wizards, the name character, he does a lot of AoE mortal wound damage. This is another way to add additional mortal wound damage at range to loads of different units, which is very, very good. So I actually like the Earth Tremble spell. The big problem with it is cast on an 8, which is going to be real tough. So that's a great spell. You've got the Empowered Celestite, which is really good. It's cast on 7 and a range of 18. If successfully cast, you pick 1 friendly Saurus unit wholly within range and visible to the caster. Until the start of the next hero phase, improve the Ren characteristic for that unit's Celestite weapons by 1. A Celestite weapon is any weapon that has a Celestite in its name. So this is what we call an economies of scale spell. So what you want to do is you want to put this on a unit that's got as many attacks as possible. You can improve the rend or improve just one single really good weapon. So there are some good weapons on like the Oldbloods on Carnosaurs, but it's only going to affect them and not affect the mount. Probably the best one this is on, in my opinion, is on Saurus Warriors, because they've already got Ren 1, which is great, taking them up to Ren 2, which is genuinely magnificent for a battle line unit. So that's a great spell, and I imagine it's a spell you're going to see a lot. So yeah, that's a very good one, especially for running lots of Saurus. I really like that one a lot. It doesn't work on Kroxigor, so this is kind of like the, it literally says Saurus unit anyway, so there you go. Then you got Drain Magic, which is a spell has a casting value of 6. If successfully cast until the end of the phase, add 1 to the dispelling rolls made by friendly units and subtract 1 from unbinding rolls for enemy units. Pretty good. Pretty good, Drain Magic. It's not bad if you want to try and shut down enemy magic phase, but you're going to be constantly buffing up your Saurus, so probably not have Drain Magic. You got Itzel's Invigoration, which is cast on a 6 and a range of 12 inches. If successfully cast, pick 1 friendly monster wholly within range and visible to the caster. Till the start of your next hero phase, use the top row of that unit's damage table, regardless of how many wounds it suffered. That one's okay. Not terrible, not great. I'm not too bothered about that, to be honest, because I maybe don't want to run a lot of monsters in this particular version, but in the right setting, that's definitely a spell. But you would have to plan for your monster to take wounds, to take this spell, to then cast this spell. So I probably am not going to use that very often, or I'm not going to pick it very often anyway. And then finally, Telepathic Summons. This is a great spell and is probably going to get FAQ'd. So I'm going to tell you what it will do, and then you're going to need to make sure you check out. The community side, Warhammer community, for the FAQ, because it's definitely going to come for this. Telepathic Summon is cast on a 6 and a range of 9 inches. This is like the spicy bit. If successfully cast, pick one friendly Saurus unit that is not a monster and that is visible to the caster. Remove that unit from the battlefield and set it up again on the battlefield wholly within range of the caster. So that's wholly within 9 inches of the caster. Now, when we get to it, the Saurus Astrolith Banner Bearer adds 6 inches to range to the spell of all spells. So that's going to take that to 15 inches. The problem with this spell is that it doesn't stipulate that you have to be outside of 9 inches from the enemy. In fact, it doesn't even stipulate you have to be outside of 3 inches from the enemy. So what you could do, if the enemy was close enough, is pick up your unit from somewhere on the board and then teleport them right in front of the enemy, and then put them straight into combat. Or, because you don't have to be 9 inches away, put them very close to the enemy, then they can move in the following movement phase and then charge. So you can get an incredibly strong unit and then just teleport them right in front of your enemy and then get a big guaranteed charge, which is really, really good. I would expect that to get FAQ'd, because almost all of teleports like this are FAQ'd to be outside of 9 inches, and it's pretty crazy that that one isn't set up. So that one to get FAQ'd, but if it doesn't get FAQ'd, crazy good. But it only works on Saurus. Then we've got spells that you can pick for your Skink Wizards. Don't forget, those spells are only spells that you can pick on Slanns. So the spells for your Skink Wizards are the Light of Chotec, cast on 7 and a range of 12 inches. You pick a friendly Seraphon model, wholly within range and visible to the caster. Roll a number of dice equal to the number of wounds allocated to it. Each 5+ you heal 1. This is quite a fun little healing mechanic instead of just being D3. The more wounded you are, the more likely you are to heal more, which is quite good. So it's okay. You got Heavenly Frenzy. Now this is very good. It's a spell that has a casting value of 7 and a range of 18 inches. If successfully cast, pick a friendly Seraphon unit wholly within range and visible to the caster until the end of the turn. That unit can run and still charge. Amazing. Now don't forget, there is a CP, or a command ability, that you can use, a generic one that everyone can use that lets you pick the result of the run roll as being a 6. So this is effectively plus 6 inch movement as a spell on a unit, and you do it in the hero phase before you ever decide to do that, so you know whether or not it's going to happen. So it's just an incredibly good spell. Run and charge, very good. It means that your cavalry units are going to be much faster. It's on Seraphon as well, so you can also do it on monsters, which is cool. So you can just have something go very, very fast and charge, which is what we like. And then finally, Tide of Serpents is cast on 7 and a range of 15 inches. If successfully cast, pick one enemy within range and visible to the caster. Roll a number of dice equal to the number of models in that unit. For each 5+, the unit suffers a mortal wound. This is what we call a horde clearing spell. Just if there's a unit of 30, 60 dudes, this is better than a unit of 10 dudes. It's good. But the standout ones here are Run and Charge, Teleport, +1 rend on Saurus only. And you can only teleport Saurus as well. So teleport Saurus, +1 rend on Saurus, a run and charge on any unit, and then the kind of big line D3 mortal wound spell, the Earth Trembles. Now that also, by the way, doesn't specify how wide the line is that you draw, which is a problem. It normally is a 1mm line, so just do play it like that. That will be FAQ'd to make sure that that is that. Otherwise, you could draw a line that's like 10 inches long and cause some real issues. So, but some really good spells in this spell lore. Really, really good. The last bit to talk about is the terrain feature. So when you play Seraphon, you get a free terrain feature. And the terrain features are different depending on which one of the two sub-factions you play it in. If you play it as Coalesced, you get different rules to if you play it as Starborne. So as we've just talked about Coalesced, let's talk about what you get if you're playing with it, in Coalesced. So you set it up, and where you set it up is written on there. You don't need me to explain that. It's impassable, which means you can't stand on it or move over it. But then you've got Fierce Guardian, so that's a special rule that you get. You add one to bite rolls made for Coalesced Saurus or Coalesced Kroxigor units with their Mighty Saurus Jaws, or Vice-like Jaws ability if they're wholly within 12 inches of this terrain feature. In addition, use the top row of the damage tables for friendly Coalesced monsters if they're wholly within 12 inches of this terrain feature. This is where things get a little bit silly, which is quite fun. Because if we take the Allegiance ability where you add +1 to the bite rolls, and if you get to fight around your temple, this means the bite attack that you get to do with your Saurus and your Kroxigor are going to happen on 4s. So that means 4+ mortal wounds off some of those units, which is quite good. The problem is that's only going to happen if you're fighting around your temple. So if you can position that temple somewhere near an objective, which is a place you're more likely to be fighting, then you're going to be doing more mortal wounds, which is really effective. And also, if you want one of your monsters to be stronger, then you're going to want to put them near that as well. It's pretty good. It's a free ability at the end of the day, which we love. But it's not too strong or too crazy, which is cool as well. Okay, so the other sub-faction, or kind of like other half of the book, are the Starborne. So Coalesced we've talked about, now we're on to Starborne. And if you choose Starborne, there are 2 sub-factions for these as well, Dracothion's Tail and the Fangs of Sotek. But if you do play Starborne, these are the battle traits that you get for your army. The first one is the Lords of Space and Time, and this is already nuts. At the start of the hero phase, you can carry out one of the following heroic actions with a friendly Starborne Slann, instead of any other heroic action you can carry out with a hero. Okay, well, what do they do? The first one is Contemplations of the Ancient One. This one's just okay. You pick one friendly Starborne Slann, replace one spell that they know from the Law of Celestial Domination with another spell from the table. That's okay. Like, you situationally pick the right spell that you want, but it's not as good as the next one, so we're going to move on quick. Which is Spatial Translocation. Pick one friendly Starborne Slann and pick one other friendly Starborne unit wholly within 12 inches of them. Remove that other Starborne unit from the battlefield and set it up again on the battlefield more than 9 inches from all enemy units. That unit cannot move in the following movement phase. And this is the trick. This is kind of the combo that we're going to talk about a lot. Specifically, Slann or Lord Kroak, either one, what they're able to do is they're able to they're able to cast spells through units in the hero phase. Heroic actions happen in the hero phase, and you get to choose which order. So what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to teleport either a Skink or, and probably more likely, a Skink Oracle on Troglodon and teleport it somewhere on the battlefield with this heroic action. Then you're going to be able to cast spells through it. So it's like kind of a free spell portal. I guess it's not, because you do have to buy the model, like as in points for the unit. But you can cast multiple spells through it, whereas the spell portal, you can only cast one spell through it. This is going to be really good when we talk about Lord Kroak's War Scroll spell, but also it's going to be good for loads of other units as well. So this is a great heroic action and really, really positive. Then you've got Cosmic Power. This is the next battle trait we're going to talk about, and this is to do with generating Cosmic Power points. If you have a Starborne army, the following are considered Cosmic Nodes, which come up a few times in the following rules. Friendly Starborne Wizard units are Cosmic Nodes. Friendly Starborne Astrolith Banner Bearers are Cosmic Nodes, which you're always going to take one of those. And a friendly Starborne Realm Shaper Engine, the terrain piece, is a Cosmic Node. During the battle, you'll be able to receive Cosmic Power Points, or CPP, to spend on abilities and summoning units to the battlefield. Right? You begin the battle with 0 Cosmic Power Points. At the start of each hero phase, each of your hero phases, not each hero phase, the start of each of your hero phases, you receive 1 Cosmic Power Point, or CPP, for each friendly Starborne Wizard or friendly Starborne Astrolith Banner Bearer on the battlefield. In addition, you receive 1 Cosmic Power Point each time a friendly Starborne Wizard successfully casts a spell that is not unbound, successfully unbinds a spell, or successfully dispels an endless spell. So the first half of this rule is... the middle bit of this rule is like having a Tzeentch army. That's literally the Tzeentch Allegiance ability. But on top of that, you get a point for every wizard you have, and in addition, you get points for unbinding or dispelling enemy spells. So there's some crazy numbers in here. We did the math on this earlier, and we'll get to summoning in a moment, but we very easily can generate between 15 and 20 CPP, or Cosmic Power Points, in each of your hero phases, which is bonkers numbers. I think if we just look at the next page very quickly, it only costs us 30 points to get an Engine of the Gods. So that's crazy. The fact that it's a Tzeentch army plus all of these abilities is just madness. Then you've got spending cosmic power points. So if you don't want to use them for summoning, and instead you'd like to spend them on abilities, which is fun, you've also got a bunch of abilities in addition that you can do. So if you want to spend 5 cosmic power points, you can do Azure Light. And this is, you can return D3 slain models to each friendly Starborne unit with a wounds characteristic of 1 or 2 that is wholly within 12 inches of any friendly cosmic nodes. Roll separately for each unit. And this isn't just one unit. This is, you can return D3 slain models to each friendly Starborne unit. So it's kind of like playing OCR Bone Reapers, but better. But Nighthaunt, but better. It's so far you're Tzeentch and Nighthaunt, but better. But let's move on. Which is pretty fun. You have Protection of the Old Ones. This is you spend 10 power points and you get a 5-up ward instead of 6-up ward from the Astrolith Bannerbearer. So the Revivifying Energies is an ability that the Astrolith Bannerbearer model has, so you'd have to buy them into your army. But everyone around that have a 5-up ward save instead of a 6-up ward save, which is what it normally gives. It's pretty good. Pretty good, especially if you've got a lot of models under there. Then you've got Cleanse of the Realms. You spend 15 cosmic power points, roll a dice for each enemy unit within 12 inches of any friendly cosmic nodes. So it's not just one cosmic node, it's any of them. And it's just within, not wholly within. So if any of your wizards, Astrolith Bannerbearer, or Terrain Piece are within range of any enemy units, then on a 2+, they suffer a number of mortal wounds equal to the roll. So if I roll a 6, like you can do multiple more, like flat 6 mortal wounds to units around every wizard. Is crazy, right? And then you got Summoning Seraphon finally. Okay, so these are the points that we talked about. Skink is 10 Skinks at 8 points, 3 Terrawings at 8 points, 3 Ripperdactyl Riders at 10 points. And like we talked about previously, it's very, very easy to comfortably get up to somewhere between 10 and 20 each hero phase. If you go up against a magic heavy army, then you could very comfortably be pushing 20 plus in a single phase, which is pretty impressive. So those are the summoning. So those are the magic power points, which are crazy. You're going to be able to get loads of them very, very quickly and very effectively, and you're going to be able to summon lots or use them for really unique abilities. So overall, phenomenal stuff. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the sub-factions that you get if you're playing Starborne. And there are 2. There's Dracothion's Tail and there's Fangs of Sotek. Dracothion's Tail let you set up units in reserve. For each model you deploy on the board, or each unit deploy on the board, you can set up another one in reserve, and you can deep strike them, but they have to be within 12 inches of a friendly cosmic node, as we talked about. That's either the terrain feature or a wizard, or the Astrolith Bannerbearer, but they have to be 9 inches from all enemy units. This is pretty good because it's going to stop you from getting at what we call alpha struck, so you can do what we call a null deploy, or you can deploy not as much stuff on the board, so your opponent can't necessarily just wipe all your stuff out in the first turn. So that's quite good, especially in the right matchup. The other one is Fangs of Sotek, which is the commanding player of a Fangs of Sotek army can use the redeploy command ability up to 3 times in each of their opponent's movement phases. In addition, the first 2 times the redeploy command issue is 20 friendly Fangs of Sotek skink units in a phase. No command points are spent. So basically, you can either spend 3 command points and make 3 units redeploy, or you can do skinks and then it's only going to cost you 1 CP to redeploy 3. I quite like that stipulation that you can still do other units up to 3 times, which is quite good. So yeah, this is not bad actually. I quite like this one, Fangs of Sotek. That's quite fun. The redeploys are very strong, especially if you're taking lots of skinks, and the Draco's Tail one is good, especially if you're looking to deep strike some stuff and do some really fun things. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this, the command traits, and I won't lie, I've been talking through this with the chat, and you and me, dear viewer, dear listener, we're going to have to talk, you have to talk me down a little bit. I'm gonna go backwards in usefulness. We're going to start with the Vast Intellect. This general knows 2 extra spells from the Lore of Celestial Dominion. Don't take that command trait on your Slann. That won't do anything. These are command traits. These are things that go on your general. Sorry, I should have said that. You got Higher State of Consciousness. You ignore modifiers, positive and negative, to save rolls for attacks that target this general. And unfortunately, they only have a 4-up save, a Slann, so you're going to want to get positives to them way more than you care about the negatives, so that one's rubbish too. You got Arcane Might. And this one is legitimately really good. Like, legitimately amazing. The general control up to 3 predatory endless spells. You can still only cast 1 in each of your hero phases. You can normally only control 1 predatory endless spell. In addition, when this general casts a spell that summons in a spell, the range of that spell is doubled, which is crazy because you can stack that with the Astrolith Banner Bearer's ability to set up a spell. So you can literally put purple suns into your opponent's territory in the first turn. They can just deploy and you can just be like, purple sun, eat that, baby. And you're like, Rob, can't get any better than that. Can't get any better than that. Guess what? You got the Lord of Celestial Resonance. Each time this general successfully casts a spell that is not unbound, successfully unbinds a spell, or successfully dispels an endless spell, you receive 2 cosmic power points instead of 1. This is so insane. This is absolutely cooked. This means if you put this on a Slann, they're going to turn up to be a wizard. That's 1 celestial power point. Then they're going to cast 3 spells because they're a Slann. So that's going to generate you 6 celestial power points. That's 7 celestial power points. Then, if you want, those spells you could cast could be your own endless spells. And then in your opponent's turn, you could just unbind your own endless spells if you want. And that's going to get you another 6 endless spells. So you are going to get 13 celestial power points. 13 just from 1 Slann. And that is going to be enough to get you 5 Hunters of Huanchi with Dart Rippers, 3 Terradon Riders, 3 Ripperdactyl Riders, all from the 1 Slann. It's crazy stuff. Like, crazy stuff. I thought the Tzeentch ability to be able to do it on a 2-cast wizard, and every time they cast a spell, they got 2 CP was strong. 2 summoning points was strong. This is another level. This is absolutely bonkers. Lord of Celestial Resonance. Take that all the time. Just always take that. Then you've got some skink command traits. I don't really know why I'm reading them when you should read the others, but I'll do it just for clarity. You've got Master of the Star Rituals. This general knows all the spells from the Law of Celestial Manipulation, which is fine. You got the Nimble War Leader. Roll 2d6 instead of d6 for making run rolls for friendly skink units while they're wholly within 18 inches of this general. Yep, love that. That's good. And then you got Shrewd Strategist. Once per battle, at the start of your opponent's combat phase, pick 1 friendly Seraphon unit wholly within 18 inches of this general. If that unit is within 12 inches of any enemy units, but more than 3 inches of all enemy units, it can immediately attempt to charge. So, incredibly good. Not that ability, sorry, because I'm still thinking about this one. The Lord of Celestial Resonance. Like, that one's Shrewd Strategist is whatever, don't care. You're just going to take this all the time. It's incredible stuff. Phenomenal. Next, we're going to look at the artifacts you get to take if you're playing in Starborne. First one is Relocation Orb, which is once per battle at the end of the phase, if the bearer has any wounds allocated to them in that phase, you can remove the bearer from the battlefield and set them anywhere wholly within 12 inches of a friendly cosmic node and more than 9 inches from all enemy units. Now, this is actually quite a fun one. This is once per battle at the end of a phase. So if someone shoots you with like a little small model or unit, then what you're going to be able to do is just teleport away, which is quite fun. So there's some really fun little trickery you can do with that, with a Relocation Orb. I quite like that one. Next one is Prison of Amniotok. This just does some mortal wounds, and we're going to skip it because it's useless. We've got the Sotek Dial. After deployment, but before the first battle round begins, secretly record the number of the battle round on a piece of paper. At the start of that battle round, reveal the information and then heal all wounds allocated to the bearer. In addition, during that battle round, add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target the bearer. And while I love this, because you can be prophetic and see into the future and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to write turn 3, you don't get that much of a benefit for this guess and for giving up one of your artifacts. So I probably would skip this. Next one, you get Space Folder's Stave. This one is very good. Once per turn, at the end of your movement phase, if the bearer's on the battlefield, you can say that they will guide the arrival of their celestial reinforcements. If you do so, the next friendly Starborne unit to be set up on the battlefield could be set up more than 7 inches from all enemy units instead of more than 9 inches. Now, this is quite interesting because what it's effectively referring to is the allegiance ability, but what it doesn't specify is the allegiance ability. And so if you take into account when you can do this, which is once per turn at the end of your movement phase, you would think, okay, and now I'm going to deploy a unit and I'll be 7 inches away. That's pretty good. But if you use it at the end of your movement phase and then you don't bother to use it, you don't bother to like set up anything then the next time you move into the hero phase and you use the heroic action to do a teleport, that will create a unit as a setup, and instead of being 9 inches away from the enemy, you can now be 7 inches away from the enemy, which is kind of a cute little trick. Not necessarily one you're going to use, but it is quite fun. Other than that, it just means that you can use one of your deep striking units 7 inches away, which is cool, in my opinion, especially for being able to like go and charge a unit that wasn't expecting it. So it's very, very effective. It also skews the math pretty massively, especially when you get +1 to charge on some units like Saurus, etc. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Then you've got Vestments of the Priesthood. So these are artifacts that you can only take on Skinks. So you've got Incandescent Rectresses. At the start of each of your hero phases, you can heal up to D3 wounds allocated to the bearer. That's okay, but again, not good for just your artifact. Then you've got Sacred Stegadon Helm, which I love, because you add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target the bearer. In addition, add 1 to the damage characteristic of melee weapons used by the bearer if they made a charge move in the same turn. Now, unbeknownst to you, because you might not have read it so far, but Skinks, specifically, Skink Priests, have got a D3 damage weapon in melee, which makes them have the same damage profile as a Bloodthirster, which is insane. But D3 +1 makes it do more damage than a Bloodthirster. So if you have a Khorne friend and your Khorne friend is being like, yeah, I'm going to use my Blood Tithe to increase my spell ignore, you'd be like, okay, that kind of makes sense. You're playing against Seraphon, that's fine. But you could charge their Bloodthirster with your Skink Starpriest and do D3 +1 damage and just generally annoy them because it does more damage than a Bloodthirster, and that's hilarious. That's just very funny. That's what I would say. Finally, Cloak of Feathers. Unit that does not have the monster keyword only. Subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by the target the bearer. In addition, add 4 inches to the bearer's move characteristic, and the bearer can fly, which is kind of okay. It's fine. +4 inches, can fly. And it's -1 to hit. That's like not bad, but the fact he can't be taken on a monster means it's going to be on a little character. So like you might use it, you might not use it, but yeah, it's okay. It's not too bad. Next up, these are the spells that you can take. So for Slanns, you've got Comet's Call. It's a spell that's cast on 7. Now, this is super famous. If you've been playing Seraphon before or have heard of Seraphon, this is such a good spell. It used to be on the War Scrolls for Kroak and also the Slann. So you might hear people saying that they aren't as good as they were before, which is definitely true because, my God, is this a great spell? But it's so healthy for the game that it is no longer on their War Scroll. So Comet's Call has casting value of 7. If successfully cast, you pick D3 different enemy units on the battlefield. If the casting roll was a 10 plus, pick up to D6 enemy units, and they suffer D3 mortal wounds each. You can't do the same unit multiple times. So if you do roll a 6, you can't do 6 D3 mortal wounds to the same unit. But it's just a great spell, especially because you get pluses to cast in this army. So it's more easy to get the 10. And you're still able to do mortal wounds at range. I think this is comfortably one of the things that you will do, but you can no longer ally a Slann in to do this, which is really healthy for the game. You got Tepok's Beneficence, which has a casting value of 5. I've definitely said that wrong. Tepok's Bin Finance has a casting value of 5 and a range of 18 inches. If successfully cast, pick 1 friendly skink unit wholly within range visible to the caster. To start your next hero phase, subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks that target that unit. We quite like that because you're going to want -1 to wound on a unit that also maybe is -1 to hit because of other abilities, like let's say the Troglodon. We know that you can put a 5-up ward on a unit as well, so you might be able to make a very survivable skink unit in your army, and -1 to wounds, my favourite debuff, so that's really good. You got Drain Magic, which is the same as from the Coalesced, which is cast on a 6, and if you successfully cast until the end of the phase, you add 1 to the dispelling rolls made for friendly units and subtract 1 from unbinding rolls made by enemy units. So this just gives you a bit more magic dominance in the game, so it's quite effective. You've got Mystical Unforging, which is cast on an 8 and a range of 12 inches. If successfully cast, you pick 1 enemy unit with a range invisible to the caster. Till the start of your next hero phase, the rend characteristic of that unit's weapon is treated as dash. This is really, really good into units that do have very high rend, obviously. I don't think you need me to explain that. But this is especially good if you're trying to make a very survivable front line, especially with the -1 to wound spell, the rend dash spell, -1 to hit aura. You could potentially use all of these spells to create quite a strong front line. Ultimately, what it mainly does is it neuters how effective one of your opponent's very damaging units is. So, great spell. And you got Stellar Tempest, which is just a mortal wound clearing spell for horde units. So you pick a unit, and then every model inside that unit on a 5-up takes a mortal wound. A bit of a classic spell. And then you've got 3 spells for the Skink Wizards. You've got Cosmic Crush, which is cast on a 7 and a range of 12 inches. If successfully cast, pick 1 enemy unit within range and roll invisible to the caster. You roll a number of dice equal to the number of models in the unit. For each roll that equals or exceeds that unit's save characteristic, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Then you've got Celestial Harmony, which is cast on a 5 and a range of 18 inches. If successfully cast, pick 1 friendly Seraphon unit wholly within range and visible to the caster. If the casting roll was a 10+, pick all friendly Seraphon units wholly within range visible to the caster. Until your next hero phase, they have a bravery of 10. This is kind of okay, but this is a spell that you'd be casting with a Skink specifically to make sure that your bravery was just a little bit better. I don't think I'll see that taken very much, to be honest. And then you got Speed of Huanchi, which is cast on a 6 and a range of 18 inches. If successfully cast, you pick 1 friendly Kroxigor or Skink unit that is not a monster and is wholly within range. That unit can make a normal move. And this is fantastic. This is a pre-game move, or a hero phase move for either Kroxigor or Skinks. And as we've talked about, you're probably going to take a lot of Skinks in this sub-faction, which is very, very good. You might take some Kroxigor as well. Who knows? And so being able to move them in the hero phase and then move them again in the movement phase is very good because then you've got a very fast army. So that's a spell that I think you'll see more than the other 2 spells, personally. Finally, the thing to talk about in Starborne is your terrain piece. So same as before, it's your free terrain piece. But this one is a lot better than the other version of the terrain piece. It's still impassable, it's still got its setup rules, but it has its special ability called the Power Unleashed. In your hero phase, if there are any friendly Seraphon wizards within 3 inches of this terrain feature, which there definitely will be because you're going to be getting loads of summoning points for having them, you can pick 1 other terrain feature on the battlefield and roll a dice for each enemy unit within 3 inches, which is crazy, of that terrain feature. Add 2 to the roll if that terrain feature is within 18 inches. So if it's close, it's going to happen on a 2+. If it's over 36 inches, which is pretty impossible, then it's going to be happening on a 6+. But on a 4+, normally, so if it's between 18 and 36 inches, every unit within 3 inches on a 4+ takes D3 mortal wounds. Okay, why is that so good, Rob? It's just splash AoE mortal wound damage, which is actually pretty rare, is actually something that people take whole units for, like a Celestin Prime, or previously used to take a Slann. So it's just an ability that other armies would love to have, and it's free on your terrain feature. I mean, terrain features aren't free, you got to pay for them, buy them, but like, they're free points-wise, they're just not free cost-wise is my point. But this is just loads of damage at range all the time. And if your opponent is silly enough to clump up around a terrain feature, you just get to do loads of mortal wounds into their army, which, as we've talked about, if you take Comet's Call, if you also take Kroak, you're potentially doing so many mortal wounds to your opponent that they're not going to know what to do with it, which is amazing. So it's great. It's great. Absolutely great, great, great. Okay, now we're on to the War Scroll. So we're going to look at all the different units. And the first one we're going to start on is the faction leader, Lord Kroak, the undead toad himself. He is an amazing 395 points. He is amazing. I'm just going to say that now. And 395 points is great, especially as you can use him as an ally at 2,000 point games, which is pretty much all we play. Okay, what makes him so good? That's an absolutely great question. He's got 18 wounds with a 4-up save, but he only moves 5 inches. But that's not really a problem because he's going to project power, or his threat range, an effective threat range, is going to be much more than 5 inches. He's also got a special way that he dies and does wounds, and we'll talk about that now. So he casts 4 spells and unbinds 4 spells, which is an amazing amount, okay? He's also very cheap at 395 points. If this unit is part of a Starborne army, he knows all of the spells from Celestial Domination. If he's part of a Coalesced army, he knows all the spells from that spell lore. So, unlike a Slann, he knows all of the spells, which is absolutely brilliant. Really good for him. He's also a War Master, so he's going to count as the general in the army, even if he's not the general, and the general will get a certain command trait, which will be the generate an extra celestial points one. But he's a War Master, which means you can do command abilities from 18 inches as well, which is quite important. He can also fly, which is good. Okay, he's got Arcane Vassal, and this is going to be the same on the Slann, and this is going to be the main kind of combo that you're going to do a lot in this army. When this unit attempts to cast a spell, before making the casting roll, you can pick either one friendly Skink Wizard within 12 inches of this unit or one friendly Oracle anywhere on the battlefield. And that's going to be a Skink Oracle, which is on a Troglodon. If you do so, the spell is successfully cast and not unbound. You must measure the range and visibility for that spell from the Skink Wizard or the Oracle. And this is already going to, you're going to get the combos whirring in your head now. Oh, so I'm going to be able to, teleport using the heroic action, and then I'm going to be able to cast some spells through it. Of course you are. That's going to be very, very good. Really, really good. Where it gets better is the Oracle, because you're going to be able to maybe backboard or hide Kroak right at the back of the board, teleport the Oracle right in the middle of the board, and then just cast all your spells from there, because you don't need to measure range, which is amazing. Very good. In any other situation, it's just useful because you're probably going to take Skinks, Skink Wizards, and so being able to cast spells through them is just going to increase the range and keep Kroak alive because you're not going to want him to die, which is good. He's got the Azurite Force Barrier, which is his attack profile. What it basically means is you measure for every model within 3 inches from one unit, and then you roll a dice equal to the number of models that you measured for, and any 5 ups, they take a mortal wound. So he's actually quite good at fighting lots of infantry, which is quite interesting. If you're near a monster, then you actually add +5 to that. So that's what he does. You add 5 dice instead. Right, then he's got Dead for Innumerable Ages. Innumerable? At the end of each phase, if any wounds are allocated to this model, and he has 18 wounds, roll 3d6 and add the number of wounds allocated to this model. On a 20+, this model is slain. On any other roll, heal all wounds to him. There's a designer's note that says if you do anything that does 18 wounds to him immediately, he automatically dies straight away instead of having to wait. This happens at the end of each phase. So Kroak is one of those units you have to absolutely kill straight off the bat. The average on 3d6 is 11, so that means you have to do about 10 wounds to him every time to make sure that you can kill him. So that's quite important, in my opinion. He's quite difficult to kill, especially if you take Saurus Guard, because those Saurus Guard are going to be able to tank wounds for him. Then he's got Implacable Foresight, which is at the start of the hero phase. Roll 3 dice for this unit. Each 4+, you receive a command point. Now, there aren't lots of command abilities to do inside the Seraphon book itself, but generating extra CP is always really useful, especially if you take Coalesced and you want to redeploy units and all those other things. So more command points is always good, especially it's on his War Scroll. Command points cost roughly about 50 points in-game. It's roughly what they're costed at, or it's what they used to be costed at. So he's worth about 75 points alone just from being able to do Implacable Foresight. In fact, each wizard level is normally worth about 100 points. So just the wizard, level 4 wizard, and also being able to receive command points, his base War Scroll cost should be about 475, just as an FYI. Right, and then he's got Supreme Master of Order, which is add 2 to casting, dispelling, unbinding rolls for this unit, which is amazing, +2 to cast. And then, in addition, this unit can attempt to unbind enemy spells that are cast anywhere on the battlefield and attempt to dispel enemy spells anywhere on the battlefield. So this is wild. So normally, you kind of have to do this thing where you have to get within 30 inches to try and dispel or unbind enemy spells or endless spells. But then you also then are in range and they can stop you. You can now just stop spells at the back of the board, but can cast your spells through Skink Oracles and Skink Priests much closer to your opponent. So this is awesome. And you've got +2 to do it, which is really fantastic. He's got the Golden Death Mask, which is at the start of the combat phase. You can pick one enemy unit within 12 inches, and you roll 2d6. If you beat their bravery, then they strike last. And it's good because it's 12 inches, so not within 3 inches. So you can just pick a unit that might be fighting your Saurus Guard or your Kroxigor, and you just give them the strike last effect, which is good. And then you've got the Celestial Deliverance. I'm going to take a moment. This is I'm recording this for the YouTubers and the podcasters, so it's meant to be a more condensed video. I'm currently hanging out with a couple of hundred people on Twitch. I just want you to know that this is truly insane. Okay? Celestial Deliverance is a spell. It's a spell. He casts a spell. It's cast on a 7, and it's got a range of 12 inches. Okay, now a couple of things to remember about this. Number one, he's naturally got +2 to cast, so that's already going to be cast on a 5. He's also going to be stood next to an Astrolith Banner Bearer every single time. And that is going to give him +1 to cast, so this is cast on a 4, and it's got a range of 18 inches, because the Astrolith Banner Bearer is going to cast it, is going to add +6 inches to the range. So that's 18-inch range, which is pretty good. Okay, this unit can attempt to cast this spell multiple times in your hero phase. So you can cast it 4 times, because he's a 4-cast wizard. Each time this spell is successfully cast, pick up to 3 different enemy units within range and visible to the caster. Each of those units suffers D3 mortal wounds. So the rough math on that is, if you do cast it all 4 times, that means you'll pick 12 units. They'll suffer on average 2 mortal wounds each. So that's 24 mortal wounds. But and it doesn't get any difficult. You've just got to roll a 4+ to cast 4 times for 24 mortal wounds at 18 inches. But if you decide to take this in Coalesced, not Coalesced, sorry, you decide to take this in Starborne, you could use the heroic action to put an Oracle right in the middle of the board, and then you could just do it from anywhere and still affect units in 18 inches, which is amazing, which is great. So this is bonkers. That's what I'm going to say, because he should, on average, when you combo him with something like Chronomantic Cog, so you get rerolls, you should average 24 mortal wounds each hero phase, which is pretty good. Over the course of 5 battle rounds, it's 124 more wounds, or roughly around. So good. Combine this with another Slann who's doing Comic's Call and maybe yeeting a purple sun at the enemy army. You have an incredibly powerful first turn. No, you do have to take an Astrolith Banner Bearer as well, and that is going to cost you additional points. But for 395 points, Lord Kroak, if I was buying a miniature today, that would be the miniature to buy. Fantastic miniature, fantastic rules, incredibly cheap, really effective. Go out there and get one. So the next up is the Slann Starmaster. So 275 points for a 3-cast wizard with 9 wounds on a 4-up armor save. Moves 5 inches. Can also unbind 3 spells and can fly. It's got the Arcane Vassal, which is what we talked about with Kroak, being able to cast spells through a Skink or an Oracle. Has got Foresight, which is kind of like Kroak, where you roll 2 dice in the hero phase, and each 4+ is going to get you a CP. You got Gift from the Heavens, which is a command ability, which you pick a Seraphon unit, and that's quite nice because it's open to any unit. What they do is they get the ability to fly, they get the fly keyword, and they get to add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target them with a missile weapon. This is a super weird, old, holdover command ability from like the beginning of Age of Sigmar that's kind of stuck around. It's quite fun. It's just a toad or a frog making any sort of unit fly. So you can make Kroxigor fly, make Skinks fly. You can make a Triceratops, it's not called that though, a Stegadon fly, and that's hilarious. That's hilarious. It's hilarious. +1 save against shooting is also just a weird, random additional buff, but it's good. It's good. So hugely love that command ability, especially good as when we talk about it. You're going to be able to have really fast, like Saurus units or Saurus cavalry units. So being able to make them fly, like double move, run and charge, and then fly, means that they're going to be super fast and be able to charge over screens, which is really useful. So it's actually a really good command ability, especially for combat units. Then you got Master of Order. A Slann, unfortunately, only adds +1 to casting, unbinding, or dispels, but can still dispel or unbind endless spells from anywhere on the board. So you can put this outside of 30 inches, which is good, and it's on its war scroll, which is even better. It's got a spell called Celestial Equilibrium, which is cast on 6, and if successfully cast until the end of the phase, you add 1 to the casting rolls for friendly wizards other than the caster. And you got Shield of the Old Ones, which is a spell that's cast on 7, and if successfully cast, the caster has a ward of 4+ against mortal wounds. So the 4+ against mortal wounds is kind of okay. Really depends on who you're up against and what the situation is. But Celestial Equilibrium is amazing. If successfully cast until the end of the phase, add 1 to casting rolls for friendly nearby wizards. Oh boy, what if I was to tell you you could do this on Kroak? So now he's got +2 on his war scroll, +1 from the Astrolith Banner Bearer. So now he's got another +1 from this. So he's casting his war scroll spell on a 3. That's right. On a 3. And it's correct, it's not even nearby. If successfully cast until the end of the phase, add 1 to casting rolls for friendly wizards other than the caster. It's board wide. It's anywhere. You get +1 to cast, you get +1 to cast. loads of +1 to cast, which is really positive. So yeah, just excellent stuff there from the Slann Starmaster. In of itself, weirdly, doesn't actually feel like it's going to bring a lot of output or damage to the board, but we know that we can take some amazing command traits for the Slann, which is good. And then he can use that spell casting to either yeet endless spells or generate more summoning points really effectively. So overall, I think that you're probably going to pick up Slann and Kroaks. Or one Kroak and Slans. So I'd probably get a couple. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Very, very good. Okay, the Skink Starseer is a generic character, so can take command traits and artifacts, and is 150 points. 6 wounds on a 4-up armor save and moves 5 inches. He is a 2-cast wizard, which at 150 points is bananas. Okay, so it's great. Now, what does he do? Number 1, he's got a combat profile, 2 attacks with the same damage output as a Bloodthirster, which is pretty legit. He's got 2 abilities. Well, 1 ability and 1 spell. He's got Scry the Stars, which is once per battle in your hero phase, you can say this unit will Scry the Stars. If you do so, roll a number of dice equal to the number of the current battle round. For each 2+, you can pick 1 friendly Seraphon unit on the battlefield. That unit has a ward of 5+ until the start of your next hero phase. This is really good because you can pick, turn 1, you can just make sure a unit has a 5-up ward save for a really strong early engagement. Or it could just be something that you pocket for the correct time where maybe you can have 2 or maybe 3 units with a 5-up ward save, which is pretty good. So it's a pretty pivotal moment. And you can use this. I think this isn't the reason you take the unit, but I actually quite like this ability, and timing this and the resource management on this is going to be quite useful. But he's got a spell. The Skink, has got a spell called Celestial Doom. It's a spell that has a casting value of 7. Don't forget, near an Astrolith banner bearer, it'll be a 6. And a range of 12 inches, or 18 inches. If successfully cast, pick 1 enemy unit within range and visible to the caster. Until the end of the turn, ward rolls cannot be made for models in that unit. So, no ward rolls. And as we've already talked about with the Slann or Kroak, already a lot of opportunity to do a lot of mortal wounds into an enemy unit. So being able to do this first, so that they do not have a ward roll, and then doing mortal wounds is quite an effective little trick. 150 points to turn off ward saves is amazing. Scry the Stars, the ability to add a ward save to your own army, is a nice little flip on that. Great value. Great miniature, great value. Definitely pick one up. Skink Starpriest is next. He's got 5 wounds with a 5-up armor save and is 130 points, which is great for a 1-cast wizard. It's exactly what you want. Has got an okay melee profile, same as a Bloodthirster. Has got a spell, unique spell, which is called Blazing Starlight, which is cast on a 6 and a range of 18 inches. And this is, you target a friendly unit, you pick an enemy unit, and until your next hero phase, you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by that unit. This is really good, especially if you combo it up with the -1 to hit aura that you can get from the Troglodon, so there'll be -2 to hit, which means even if they use the +1 to hit all-out attack ability, they're still going to be -1 to hit, which is great. The Serpent Staff ability, though, is probably the reason you're going to take Skink Starpriest, and at 130 points, it's great value. In your hero phase, you can pick 1 friendly Seraphon unit. So that means any unit, which is great, wholly within 12 inches of this unit. If you do so, to your next hero phase, if the unmodified wound roll for an attack is a 6, then the unit suffers a mortal wound in addition. This is wonderful on Saurus Warriors or Skinks. Units with lots of attacks, and therefore they're going to be rolling lots of dice, and you're just doing bonus mortal wounds, which is wicked. So really, really good. Especially effective if you're going to generate a lot of attacks. A good spell, 130 points, wicked deal. Definitely got one of those too. Next unit is the Skink Oracle on Troglodon. 14 wounds with a 4-up armor save, which is quite nice considering he's really of a support piece, not a frontline melee monster. Okay, so he's got a shooting attack, which is called Noxious Spittle, which is 3 attacks and damage 2, but no rend. But it does have a nice 18 inches, which somehow brackets for some reason. I guess he gets more tired. And then he's got an okay fighting profile. The Divining Rod from the Skink on the top has got D3 damage. The Talon Forelimbs have got 2 attacks that do damage 2. And the Venomous Jaws have got 3 attacks at damage 3. 270 points, exactly. He's 270 points. But what does he do? Well, he's a wizard for a start, a 1-cast wizard. And he's got regeneration. So at the start of each hero phase, he can heal D3, which is good because he's only got a 4-up armor save, so he's more on the fragile side. He's got Stench of Death, which is you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by enemy units within 9 inches of any friendly units with this ability. Now, what's really cool about this, in my personal opinion, what's really cool about this is this also is going to affect shooting units as well. So if you can get this guy close enough, I don't know, using some sort of like command trait or ability so you can get within 7 inches, you can make it to the minus to hit, which is useful. Okay, we love that. So this is good. That's a nice thing because he's really a support monster piece, which is quite unique as a unit. So I quite like this. And then he's got Terror. Enemy units cannot receive Inspiring Presence command while they're within 3 inches of any friendly units with this ability. So if you do charge in, which is really good, then they can't use Inspiring Presence, which means they can't ignore Battle Shock tests, which is very useful against some armies. And then you got Venomous Spittle. Oh, yes, you can also make the Stench of Death ability a 12-inch aura if you go into the Coalesced subfaction. So you can use the monstrous action, Odious Roar, and you can make the range of this be 12 inches as opposed to 9 inches, which is pretty nice. On the Skink for that ability, but that's if you play him in Coalesced. But if he is in Coalesced, because he's a monster, he's also going to be -1 damage, which is quite nice. So the -1 to hit and -1 damage, I feel like you definitely would take one of these to potentially build a more tanky Coalesced army, making all units like minus to hit and also more survivable. So that's very effective in my opinion. So definitely think about taking it in Coalesced. Terror's good. Venomous Spittle is if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with the Noxious Spittle, which is a shooting attack, or the Venomous Jaws is a 6, the attack causes a number of mortal wounds to the target equals to the weapon's damage, which is quite nice. So basically, if they're damaged 3 on the Venomous Jaws, if you roll a 6 to hit with the 3 attacks, then you're going to do 3 mortal wounds. And then he's got Primordial Mire, and this is actually phenomenal, especially if you're going to do this in conjunction with being able to do mortal wounds using the Realm Shaper engine. What it is a spell that's cast on a 7 and a range of 12 inches. If successfully cast, pick one objective or terrain feature within range and visible to the caster. Until your next hero phase, units within 3 inches of that objective or terrain feature cannot run or retreat and must halve the result of charge rolls. This spell has no effect on skink units. Now, as we talked about, there's the potential to do lots of AoE damage if you're taking Starborne, and you can use the Realm Shaper engine to blow up a piece and then also pin them into a piece of terrain, meaning they're just going to take more mortal wounds, which is really effective. If you want to flip this around and do this in Coalesced, there's definitely a kind of pinning list in Coalesced where you charge units up, you pin your opponent back, and then having it so that they can't retreat out of that, therefore free themselves of your more tanky and survivable units, is, again, another tactic which is really powerful. So just crazy good. So like there's some really good stuff here. So the Troglodon's really good. Just watch out for that. Really, really powerful. 270 points. It's an interesting support piece. Maybe it'll get dropped for other units that do more, but it does definitely benefit all of your strong units, Kroak, Slann, and your combat units. So ultimately, I think it's very good. For 330 points, you can get a Stegadon Chief, which is 14 wounds and a 4-up save, and he's a combat support character who is also a bit of a shooter. Kind of interesting. He can take a range of different missile weapons, either the Skystreak bow, which is legitimately quite good. 24-inch range, 3 shots, 3 threes, rend 1, damage 3. Now, the rend 1 is a bit of an issue, but 24-inch range on a profile that moves 8 inches, so that you have a 32-inch effective range, in my opinion, is very, very good. So that's nice, and you could especially see taking a few of those, maybe if you took Battle Line Stegs, and you took a bunch of shooting at range, and then when they get close, you countercharge them with the same unit, which is quite nice. Then he's an okay combat profile with 5 crushing stomps doing damage 2, 2 grinding jaws doing damage 2, and then 2 massive horns which do damage 4. So it's an okay melee profile, but it's only rend 1 on most of those, and that can be a bit of an issue into high armor stuff. Only moves 8 inches as well, so isn't super fast, but if you do take them in Coalesced, they're going to be -1 damage, which is really good, and able to do unique monstrous actions. He's got an armored crest, so if you fight models with units with 5 or less models, you're going to get +1 to your save, which is going to put you on a 3-up save. But it's not to your save characteristic; it's +1 to the roll. And then you've got a coordinated strike, which is once per turn, this unit can issue a command to a friendly skink unit with that command point being spent, which is pretty good. Like, it's a free command point, but if you're taking loads of Slanns anyway, you're getting some command points for days, so it doesn't really add much to it. You get to add 3 to the bravery characteristic of skink units, but not ones with the Stegadon keyword. And then the Sunfire Throws is one of the other abilities it has, and this relates to its shooting profile that you'll take instead of a Sky Streak bow, where it effectively will do mortal wounds to the unit within 8 inches, depending on how many models are within that 8-inch range, which is quite nice on 5-up. So it's kind of a horde clearing gun spell, a big fire breathing flamethrower, which is quite fun in the right matchup. Especially good if you get charged, because you can use stand and shoot, and there'll be no minuses to hit because it doesn't affect that ability. So that's kind of fun. And then he's got Unstoppable Stampede, which is quite legit, which is after this unit finishes a charge move, roll a dice for each enemy unit within 1 inch. Normally you only hit 1 unit, but this hits multiple units. And on a 2+, the enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. So overall, a combat character who does support for skinks, which is kind of okay, but are we taking clouds of skinks? Is he going to do as much output as summoning with Slanns and Kroak? Probably not. Is it more effective probably to have a bunch of Saurus or Kroxigor in here instead? Probably. So I don't really know what his job is, and the War Scroll doesn't seem to know what his job is either. But maybe you can build yourself a really fighty melee Stegadon Chief and go have some fun. The first battle line unit we're going to look at are Skinks. Little tiny Skinks. They come in units of 10 and they're 85 points. They have 1 wound each and they move 8 inches. So they're quite fast, which is nice, and they're bravery 5. And that's a problem because they're going to run away to Battle Shock. So maybe the Skink Chief we looked at, increasing their bravery, is going to be very, very impressive or useful. But their loadout is going to be interesting as well. What you can do is you can either take a Bolt Spitter, a Celestine Club, and also a Shield. And then what this is going to do is give you a 5-up armor save instead of a 6-up armor save. That's probably the more defensible version of this. So you get to do some shooting at 16 inches, but you also move 8, which is pretty nice. It's not great shooting, but we'll talk about why you want to do these things in a minute. But you end up with a more defensible unit. The other version of this, which maybe does more damage but is less survivable, is you take a Bolt Spitter and you take the Moonstone Club, because the Moonstone Club has got 2 attacks in close combat, which is quite nice. Or you could try and make a kind of small melee unit in the Moonstone Club and also having a shield. That means no Bolt Spitter for you, so you're not going to be able to affect units at range. But they're a fast unit and they could potentially run and charge. They could fly, so there's loads of things that they could do to get into combat. The reason that we want to get lots of attacks on one of these units is because, obviously, as we looked at with the Skink Priest, any 6s to wound are going to do a mortal wound. So being able to stack them is going to be very good. The most attacks you can get, and with a unit of 30 of these, only 255 points. If you take the Moonstone Club and the Bolt Spitters, that's going to equal 60 melee attacks and also 30 shooting attacks. So any 6s to wound are going to cause mortal wounds, which with 90 attacks, that's going to be 10 mortal wounds. 10 mortal wounds. Or is that even more? 15 mortal wounds, which is decent. So overall, I quite like that. I think that's actually quite nice. They're very cheap. It's nice to have a cheap, not useless option, a cheap unit that you can do some buffs to and it can do some stuff. It's not going to change the world, but it could do some incredible things. So pretty nice. I quite like Skinks. Skinks are decent. I think you'll want to build and paint some Skinks. The next unit we're going to look at is the artillery piece in the army. It's 125 points. It's called the Spawn of Chotec. Or a salamander. I mean, they just don't want to say salamander, but it's a salamander. It's 8 wounds with a 4-up save, and for 125 points, it's cheap. It's got a couple of different shooting profiles. It's got one at 24 inches, but it's one attack that hits on a 4, and this is a big boo, because it's got a very effective ability. It hits on a 4, wounds on a 2, rend 2, d6 damage. What you really want, my personal opinion, is to hit with this, because it activates the ability Glob of Flame Acid. Get globbed. And that means if any wounds were caused by this, the glob of attack, which means you've got to hit, you've got to wound, they can't save it, and you've got to roll a d6, which they don't ward. Then until the end of that turn, they're -1 to their save rolls. This is actually pretty good. Like we talked about earlier, we will talk about, in the future. Saurus Warriors are able to have Rend 1 on their War Scroll. They've got a spell that can make them Rend 2. So this would make them effectively Rend 3, which is quite nice. Kroxigor going in at Rend 3 and Rend 4 effectively would be really good at this. So you could definitely see running these in Coalesced. I don't think these necessarily benefit stuff in Starborne because the way you're doing damage there is via mortal wounds. You're not really trying to reduce saves. But if you're in Coalesced and you want to do a bunch of damage, I feel like this is something that's quite interesting. The other version of shooting is Stream of Fire, and what this does is kind of an AoE damage attack. It shoots into a horde, and it does up to 10 attacks, which I don't know why it's capped, but it is. And it hits on a 2, wounds on a 3, Rend 2, damage 1. So you just kill a bunch of dudes, which is quite fun. And then it's got an okay combat profile of 3 attacks at Rend 2, damage 3, which is pretty legit, especially if you do the glob of fire and then you charge in. It's actually going to be Rend 3, damage 3, which is pretty strong. So would I take one? Probably not. And if you're going to take one, and as has been pointed out in the chat, which is really lovely by the Diecast AOS, if you're going to take one, I would take multiples to guarantee that -1 to save to a unit, which is quite cool. But I wouldn't take one necessarily all the time anyway. But if you got it off and then you get all the other buffs happening, you could really do some damage thanks to this unit and with this unit, which is cool. Coming in units of 5 and being 90 points, the Hunters of Huanchi are kind of chameleon skinks, but no more chameleon skinks. They've got 6 up save, 1 wound, and they move 8 inches, but they are not 135 points, 135 points for 5 of them. But they're not very survivable. What they are is kind of like an assassin unit that teleports in and does damage. They do that with their dart pipe, which is 16-inch range and 2 shots each. So out of the unit, you are going to end up with 10 shots. They hit on 3, wound on 3, no rend damage 1. But they do have Star Venom, which is any 6s to hit are going to cause a mortal wound. That's what the Star Venom does. Which is pretty good. So you're going to do potentially 2 mortal wounds, but then the addition, it's not in addition, so then just the damage step ends. They have perfect mimicry, which is the unit is not visible to the enemy units that are more than 12 inches away, all while it's in cover. So if you do put them in cover, you won't be able to see them, all while 12 inches away, which is good because they're a very fragile unit, but their 16-inch blowpipes means that you're probably going to be close enough to be charged. So that's an issue. However, they maybe get around that with the Chameleon Ambush. They can be set up into Deep Strike, which is nice, but they also have this ability that at the end of the movement phase, you can take them back off the board, and then you can bring them back on the board in Deep Strike again at the end of the next movement phase. So you can kind of keep redeploying them off the board. For 90 points, they give you a good opportunity cost for a unit that can kind of snipe units in the backboard. But I don't see them being very effective at doing so when you do it. Maybe if they'd have had 3 attacks, I'd have been a little bit more interested. But for me, I don't necessarily think I'd pick them up, but they're an interesting choice. For 90 points is the other version of the the Hunters of Huanchi. They are 90 points for a unit of 5. So they've got a couple of abilities, but most importantly, they have the same ambush mechanic as the other Hunters of Huanchi. So they can deep strike, and at the end of the movement phase, they get to move away, which is quite good. They have a 5-up armor save versus a 6-up armor save, which is nice. And they move 8 inches, which is good. But if they deep strike in, that already helps you out. But they're only a unit of 5. They also have the ability Perfect Mimicry, which is this unit is not visible to enemy units that are more than 12 inches away while they're in cover. More than 12 inches away, all while they're in cover, which is good. So they don't get shot, but also they're a unit that want to charge, which I think is interesting. But they do have an ability if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with their Starstone Bowlers, which are 8-inch range. The target unit is stunned until the end of the following combat phase. Subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by the unit that is stunned. So you have another ability, only 90 points, to stack into this kind of -1 to hit situation where you could use the Troglodon, you could do this, you could use the Starpriest spell to get loads of -1 to hits. But not bad, like very fragile, probably not for me, but I definitely could see people using them. Definitely. So, the 2 new skink units that you get in the FOMO box. I know what you're asking yourself, Rob, should I pick up the FOMO box? Well, okay. Both of them are 150 points for units of 5. And you've got the shooty ones and the fighty ones. And the Raptadon Hunters are the shooty ones, and the Raptadon Chargers are the fighty ones. And in my opinion, you just take the Chargers. But we'll talk about why right now. So what happens? And they've got this kind of interesting synergy between themselves. So they're 2 wounds each, so that's going to be a unit of 5, so it's going to be 10 wounds on a 5-up armor save. And like I said, they're 150 points. They move 12 inches, which is nice and fast, but they are only bravery 5, so they're going to run away real easy. They've got 12-inch range with their shooting attack. It's got 2 attacks, 4s and 4s, Ren 2, damage 1. Now, the Ren 2 is super nice, and it is going to be 10 attacks from the unit, but 4s and 4s means that you're only going to get 2.5 shots through. I know you can't get a half shot through, but that's roughly the math, right? Which isn't actually that effective. The champion gets +1 attack characteristic on their shooting attack, so technically you get 11 shots. The standard bearer adds +1 to the bravery, which is good because they're only bravery 5. And then the musician, which adds 1 to the run and charge rolls for the unit. And the +1 run and charge rolls is nice in the right situation. Then you've got deadly cohesion, and this is how they synergize with the other unit. And this is at the end of the charge phase if this unit is more than 3 inches from all enemy units within 12 inches of any friendly Raptadon Chargers. So the other unit, not these guys. These guys are the Hunters. They get to make a shooting attack as long as they're not within 3 inches. So this is the situation. The Raptadon Hunters move up, they shoot a unit, they don't do any damage. But then the Raptadon Chargers charge in, and then that means that the Raptadon Hunters get to make another shooting attack that doesn't do any damage, which is kind of lame for 150 points in my personal reading of the War Scroll. However, Raptadon Chargers, it completely changes around, which is really nice. So they're same profile, 2 wounds, 5-up save, 150 points, move 12 inches. But when they charge in, if one of the Hunters units is shot, you get +1 to hit on the Lances. Now, the problem with this is you only get +1 to hit on the Lances, and they only hit on 4s already. But if you give them all-out attack, you get +1 to hit on the Lances and +1 to hit on the serrated Fangs attack, which is much more effective. And that means you could take 2 units of Raptadon Chargers, which would be much more effective than taking the Shooters, which don't do any damage. They also have this really cool ability called Geomantic Empowerment. The damage characteristic of this unit's Tepoch Lances is 2. Normally it's 1 instead of 1. If this unit is contesting an objective or if it's within 3 inches of any arcane scenery rules. Now, the arcane one's probably not going to happen, but contesting objectives is just going to be very, very positive. And these guys have got a phenomenal amount of attacks. Remember we talked about earlier with Skink Starpriest and wanting as many attacks as possible. Well, the Tepoch Lance has got 3 attacks. That's going to be 15 from the unit, +1 from the champion, so 16. And then the serrated Fangs from the mounts is another 15 attacks. So just a unit of 5 for 130 points is going to be 31 attacks, and if you're giving them all-out attack, they're going to be hitting on 3s and 2s, wound on 3s, rend 1, which is a bit of a shame, that's not quite as good, and then they're going to be damage 2 on 15 of those attacks, and damage 1 on the other. But they're also going to be new mortals on 6s to wound, thanks to Skink Starpriest. So I quite like this. I think the Raptadon Chargers are better than Shooters, but you might be able to make them all work together, so really good. Really, really cool. Nice little units. Okay, you're looking for some Skinks, and you're looking to fly in the sky? Well, let me interest you in a Terradon Chief and some Terradons. Now, the Terradon Chief is 110 points on 6 wounds with a 6-up save, so not very survivable, but he does have a 16-inch move, which is pretty good. He's pretty terrible in a fight, I won't lie, but he does have an ability called Deadly Cargo, which is if he moves or runs over a unit, then on a 4+, they take D3 mortal wounds. He only does this once per battle, but if he does any mortal wounds to the enemy unit, then they halve their move characteristic until your next hero phase, which is a legit ability. It's quite good. He's also got the coordinated attack ability, which is for the Terradon Riders we're about to talk about, which is the same mortal wound ability, but he makes it so that they do mortal wounds on 2s instead of 4s. And again, he does that once per battle, which is pretty good. And then we've got attack on high. Subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by missile weapons that target this unit. which maybe makes him a little bit more survivable, but probably not. Which is a bit weak. It feels like a one-use thing, which for 110 points, you can't really get much cheaper to do a one-use thing. But is it really worth it when you can do multiple damage with things like Kroak and other stuff? It's a great question. Now, the Terradon Riders are a unit of 3. They've got 3 wounds each, so that's 9 wounds, and they're 120 points for that 3. The maximum unit size you can have is 6. They've got a couple of different weapon options, but none of them have any rend, but you can get quite a lot of attacks, like the razor-sharp jaws on the Terradons is 4 attacks each, so that's 12 attacks. But they're 4s and 4s, so that immediately drops to doing 3 wound rolls to your opponent, and with no rend, means you probably do almost no damage, which is a bit of a shame. Now, the one ability that they do have, which is really good, they have 2 abilities, actually. They have the -1 to be shot by missile weapons, but they've also got the deadly cargo ability, which is for every model in the unit. On a 4+, the enemy unit takes D3 mortal wounds. If you've moved or ran across it, you do this once per battle. But the important part is you obviously can use the Skink Terradon Chief to make it 2+. So math-wise, you're doing 5 D3 mortal wounds, which is 10 mortal wounds, and you can do that by moving 16 or even running an additional 6. That's 22 inches, which feels really legit. But then you're spending 240 points to do that, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then you've got to take the Skink Chief, so that's 110 points, that's 350 points. So is it worth it? That's a great question, I don't know. It might be, it might not be. I think definitely fun in some solo games, but once they've dropped their cargo and their payload, they're worthless. So I'm not really sure, to be honest. I'm going to go for no. I wouldn't pick any of these up if I were you. I would like them to be cooler, but okay. We haven't left the skies yet. We're still dealing with the Ripperdactyl Chief and the Ripperdactyl Riders. They're 110 points for the Ripperdactyl Chief. They've got 6 wounds and a 5-up save, and they move 12 inches. This is the Ripperdactyl Chief, 110 points. He flies, obviously. He has an ability where he's -1 to hit from shooting, and this is called Swooping Dive. And if someone uses the Unleash Hell command ability against it, he only scores... they only score hits on 6s versus what they normally do, and this is also true for the Ripperdactyls themselves. So that's quite a nice ability. So you can charge stuff in, which is good. He's also got the Toad Rage ability. So there's the Blot Toad and the Toad Rage ability. Effectively, for every Ripperdactyl Chief in your army, you can attach a Blot Toad to an enemy unit, and if you then attack them in close combat, the Toad Rage ability kicks in. All hail the Blot Toad, and you get +1 to hit and wound with the Tearing Jaws ability, which on the Ripperdactyl Chief is 3 attacks, 4s and 3s. So it would go down to 3s and 2s, rend 1, damage 2, which is not that much to sing about. However, once per battle, the Ripperdactyl Chief can call a Ripperdactyl Assault, and that's going to give +1 attack to all Ripperdactyl Riders and their mounts while they're wholly within 12 inches. So let's talk about the Ripperdactyl Riders. They come in units of 3, they've got 3 wounds each, and they're 120 points. They got a 5-up save, and they move 12 inches. So they're kind of fast, but they're not that fast. They also get +1 to hit and wound if they fight a unit with the Blot Toad, which is the good old Toad Rage, and then Swooping Dive. By the way, one of my favourite minis is the Blot Toad marker. There's a little designer's note on it, but it's just a little frog you put near a unit. And while I think this unit isn't very good in the game, it's one of my favourite things to just put on the board. However, they've got the Swooping Dive ability, which is the -1 to be hit from shooting, and also only 6s will proc against them in the Unleash Hell command ability. What's their melee profile like, though, for 120 points for 3? Well, they got 3 attacks, 4s, 3s, rend 1, damage 2, which is kind of okay. If they're fighting a Toad unit, it's going to be 2s. It's going to be hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s, rend 1, damage 2. The rend 1's the major issue. We know if we were to take a spawn of Chotec, we'd be able to make that so they've got -1 save, so they could be at rend 2. Damage 2, but they just don't have enough attacks, and because they've only got 1-inch range on their Tearing Jaws, if you were to reinforce them to a unit of 6, then you wouldn't be able to fight with all of those units because they wouldn't be able to reach over because their bases are too big to reach over and attack. So unfortunately, these are also a miss for me. I don't see them being as effective as the Raptadon Riders or anything like that, so Just not for me. Okay, we're on to some Saurus now. Some big, meaty, muscular Saurus. Saurus Oldblood is 285 points. He's obviously a leader. He's also obviously a monster. If you did want to take him in the Coalesced sub-faction, you would be able to do that monstrous action unique to him. So eating a unit or eating a model out if you roll above its wounds characteristic. He's got 15 wounds and a 4-up save. Also, if you're in Coalesced, you'd obviously be -1 damage, which is pretty good. 15 wounds, 4-up save, but moves only 10 inches, so not that fast, unfortunately, but does have the Saurus keyword, so that's nice. All the buffs that apply there. Has got a bunch of different weapon profiles, but I guess the main one you want to talk about is the 3 massive jaw attacks. They're damage 5 and rend 2, which is honestly quite legit, especially for the points value they get at 285 points. My main issue with the Saurus Oldblood is that if you're going to take a Saurus Oldblood, you're going to stack a command trait, an artifact, and a bunch of other abilities on it to make it a little bit more fighty. What I really would have liked to seen from a Saurus Oldblood miniature, or rule set, sorry, is I would have liked to have seen them just be given the damage output of something like a Frostlord and Stonehorn and made as effective. While 15 wounds on a 4-up save is really great, he doesn't have a ward save in his War Scroll either, and so I'm not trying to be down on this mini or the Scarvet, which is the same, but they're cheap, which is good, but they're bad because they're cheap. They're points costed pretty much at the right point for what they do, but what they do is just kind of okay, and not really worth it, my opinion. They do have some special abilities, though, which is Blood Frenzy. If any enemy models are slain by wounds caused by this unit's attacks, for the rest of the battle, this unit is Blood Frenzied, and you add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by this unit's mount while it's Blood Frenzied, which is kind of okay. Terror, so you can't use Inspiring Presence while within 3 inches, which is a nice ability to have. And then this unit can issue the same command up to 2 times thanks to being an Ancient Warlord in the same phase, which is useful if you want to do a couple of rallies or a couple of all-out attacks, I guess. But I personally wouldn't spend 285 points for that ability. I would just be better on the tabletop than use that. I know that sounds like over the top, but it's just how I feel. But like, it's there. Like, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's completely good for its points cost of 285 points as a melee character, which is what it is, a melee monster. But I would have liked to have seen it cost more and do more damage. And that's also true for the Saurus Scarvet, which has got 15 wounds with a 4-up save, also on Carnosaur. It's also got Blood Frenzy, which we just spoke about. Also got Terror, which we just spoke about. It's got an special ability called Maim and Tear. At the end of the combat phase, you can pick one enemy within 1 inch of this unit and roll a number of dice equal to the number of wounds allocated to that enemy unit. For each 5+, the unit suffers an additional mortal wound, right? So, pretty solid. Pretty solid. You just get to do some extra damage. Everyone in the chat wants me to point out, and I think it's quite fair to point out, the Ancient Warlord, so being able to do 2 command abilities, is quite nice for double all-out attack, especially if you are going for like multiple small unit or MSU Saurus hosts. Seems quite good, because as we know, when they charge, they get +1 to wound, so also giving them +1 to hit, or at least 2 units +1 to hit, also feels pretty legit as well. So overall, like, not bad. I'm not saying they're bad. Like, what I'm saying is I would have liked to see more expensive, more effective units, which is kind of what I think a dinosaur, riding a dinosaur, should be. I want to be terrified of a Carnosaur, not just kind of like, it's kind of okay. Like, I don't want its best ability to be being able to do 2 command abilities. I want it to be like, it's going to rip stuff apart, which it could do, potentially, with its massive jaws. Anyway, those are the Carnosaurs. Okay, we're going to look at some Saurus heroes now. The other guys are kind of like Saurus not heroes. These are Saurus heroes. The Saurus Oldblood on foot is 135 points and is, in my opinion, legit. Especially if you're taking loads of Saurus, when you go Koatl's Claw, when you go Coalesced. So he's got 7 wounds with a 3-up armor save, but only moves 5 inches, but it's kind of okay. Now, he's pretty good in a fight. 5 attacks, 3s, Rend 1, damage 2. Rend 1's lame, but whatever. And he's got a couple of abilities. Because now we're talking about Saurus on foot. I know it was ages ago we talked about this, but don't forget, Saurus have got a jaw ability, the Mighty Saurus Jaws, and at the end of combat, they are going to well, not at the end of combat, but each time this unit fights after all of its attacks have been resolved, you get to pick one enemy within 1 inch of this unit and roll 3 dice. These dice rolls are referred to as bite rolls. For each bite roll of a 6, the enemy suffers a mortal wound. But don't forget, it could be 5s when we go into the Coalesced subfaction, and it could be 4s if we're fighting near our Realm Shaper engine, which is pretty nice. So there's some nice combat there, but he's a support piece. That's what he's really doing, which is Predatory Exemplar and Wrath of the Seraphon. Predatory Exemplar is just something we see a lot. It's just he gets to fight at the same time as a unit of Warriors or Saurus Guard in the combat phase. Ignore that. It's kind of okay, but whatever. The important one is Wrath of the Seraphon. In the combat phase, if this unit issues all-out attack command to friendly Saurus Warriors or Saurus Guard, then they get +1 to wound in addition to the +1 to hit. Until the end of that phase. Now that's really nice because you don't necessarily have like massive punch power with units of Saurus Warriors or Saurus Guard, and instead getting that additional +1 to wound in ongoing combats where you're not constantly charging is really, really nice. It's a great command. Well, it's not even a command ability. It's just you do the all-out attack, so it is a command ability, but like it's an addition to the command ability. So for 135 points, that's really nice. I really like that. I think that's really good. The Saurus Astrolith Banner Bearer is 140 points, and pretty much just get one. Go buy one. Buy 2. You don't need to. It's useless, but just in case someone takes your first one. 6 wounds with a 4-up armor save, so he's kind of okay for a foot hero, and he's cheap enough that he's fine. He moves 5 inches, and he's okay in a fight, but that's not his job as well, like for a foot hero. What he does is he's a Celestial Conduit. Add 1 to casting rolls for friendly Seraphon Wizards within 12 inches of any friendly units with this ability. And that's all Seraphon Wizards, which is crazy. And then he adds 6 inches to the range of any spells cast by friendly Seraphon Wizards within 12 inches. So all your spells are +1 to cast, and they've got an additional 6-inch range. That's not where it doesn't end there. He's also got the Revivifying Energies ability, which is friendly Seraphon units have a ward save of 6 while within 12 inches, which is great. And as we know, if you go into Starborne, then you can make it so that that becomes a 5-up ward save, which is incredibly good. Yeah. There's just no reason that you're not going to take this unless you're not taking a spellcasting Seraphon army, and probably the reason you're doing that is you don't want to win any games. And so just great. He's also got the Saurus Jaws ability, so he does some mortal wounds after he's fought in combat. So just go buy one. Just go buy one. That's it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the new units. They look pretty cool. They're dinosaurs riding dinosaurs. Saurus Scar Veteran on Aggradon. 8 wounds, 4-up save, moves 8 inches, and does 175 points. You can either take the Celestite Spear or Celestite Club, so don't forget, if you are playing in Coalesced, you have got a spell that can make it so that you add additional rend. So his Celestite Spear, for example, can be 4 attacks, 3 threes, rend 3 damage too, so it's pretty fighty. And then he's got the rending bites and striking talons of his mount, the Aggradon, which is 3 attacks, 3 threes, rend 2 damage too, which is an OK profile as well. But there is a way to take that up to 6 attacks. Well, actually, technically, if you take one of the command traits on the Slann, also in Coalesced, it could be up to 7 attacks, which is quite interesting. But we'll talk about that now. And that's all because of the Primal Rage ability, which is effectively a counter. The longer you're in combat, the higher your rage amount. And the higher your rage amount, the more attacks you add to the rending bites and striking talons. Okay, so, and up to a maximum of 3. So that's 3 attacks with an additional +3 that you can add. The weird thing about this, and they are rend 2 and also damage 2, so it's quite a lot of attacks. But the weird thing about this, in my personal opinion, is a cavalry unit that charges in and then wants to get stuck in cavalry in combat. He's only got 4-up armor save, he doesn't have a ward save, and has only got 8 wounds. So it feels odd to put him in there. Now, he's also got an Alpha Roar ability, which is once per battle at the start of your combat phase, you can pick one friendly unit with this ability on the battlefield to unleash a feral roar. If you do so, you increase the range score of friendly Aggradon units holding within 18 inches of that unit by 1 to a maximum of 3. Sorry, the rage roar score, not the whatever I said score, the rage score, which moves us on to the Aggradons. Now, the Aggradon Lancers are 210 points for a unit of 3. They have a 5-up armor save and a 4-up armor save with 5 wounds each. So you're going to get 15 wounds out of this unit for 210 points, which is pretty decent. And they move 8 inches, which isn't super fast. But they are Bravery 8, which is nice. Okay? So they also have Celestite Spear or Celestite Club, so you could use the spell if you want to add the additional rend on. We already know that you can move in the hero phase using one of the abilities in Coalesced, or one of the command traits in Coalesced. You can move in the hero phase and then move again, so they could be moving 16 inches. You can cast a spell on them for run and charge. You can make the Slann make them fly, so you can have flying missile dinosaur riders. And when they get there, they'll do some okay damage. Like we've said before, the Celestite Spears are going to be 3 attacks at Rend 2, damage 1. And the Rending Bites and Striking Talons are 3 attacks each, so 9 for the unit. 3s and 3s, Rend 2, damage 2. So it'll be wound on 2s on the charge. So they're not bad. They're not bad at all. And they've also got the Primal Rage ability, so the longer they're in the fight, the more output they're going to get, which is pretty good. We know you can give them a 5-up ward save, either from the banner or from the 2+ ability from the Skink Starpriest, which is pretty nice, or the Skink Starseer, sorry. So that's pretty good. So you can make them survivable, and you can make them do output. My big problem with them is because they're a unit of 3, then when you take them up to a unit of 6, you then have to adhere to adherency. Coherency. You have to adhere to coherency. And so it's going to be more difficult to arrange all of the attacks with only 1-inch range on the Rending Bites. It also requires you to stay in combat to get more attacks, and that means you're probably going to be losing models. So it feels a little bit ineffective. They're a weird cavalry unit that wants to get in there and then it wants to fight. And would I decide to take a Saurus Scarvet on Aggradon to buff the Aggradon Lancers? I probably wouldn't, because the once per game ability to have 1 additional attack doesn't seem anywhere near as effective as just spending a couple more points and getting another unit of Aggradon Lancers, in my opinion. So I quite like them. I think they're quite good. Which is quite interesting. You can just pin them. We've talked about earlier in the show, we talked about a pin list. We talked about taking a bunch of these, moving them in the hero phase, moving the movement phase, charging, then using the spell on the Troglodon to make it so that units can't move out from terrain pieces. So that's not bad, but they aren't crazy survivable. I mean, you would have to run up -1 to hit bubbles from Troglodons or cast spells. You would have to put 5-up ward saves on them, cast Mystic Shield, all-out defense. There's a lot of stuff you're going to have to do to stack on top of these units to just make these units just okay, in my opinion. So I'd be interested to know what you think on this one, so please do let me know in the comment. 200 points for 10 Saurus Warriors. I like these. I think these are good. 2 wounds apiece, so that's going to be 20 wounds on a 4-up armor save, right? You're like, oh, that's quite expensive, 200 points for 20 wounds on a 4-up armor save, but they're pretty good in my personal opinion. You can either take them with the Celestite Spears, which is a 2-inch range, so if you were taking more than 10 and you want to fight from 2 ranks, then maybe you would get yourself a good old Celestite Spear. But unfortunately, they hit on 4s, wound on 3s, rend 1, damage 1. If you go for the clubs instead, shorter range, but you hit on 3s, wound on 3s, rend 1, damage 1. Don't forget that, and they're 2 attacks each. If you take them in Koatl's Claw, they're going to be wounding on 2s on the charge, or you could use the Oldblood on foot to give them +1 to wound, and with an all-out attack, you are going to be 2s and 2s. Cast a spell, 2s and 2s, rend 2, which is pretty nice. Do a Stream of Fire from a Chotec, 2s and 2s, rend 3, damage 1, which isn't too bad. Problem is survivability. And their War Scroll covers that a little bit. They've got add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target this unit if it's contesting any objectives or if it's wholly within your territory. So that means it's going to have a 3-up armor save. We know we can get minuses to hit, and we know that we can get 5-up ward saves. So overall, pretty nice. Oh, and finally, the Saurus Jaws ability. I didn't talk about that. This is probably where you get the most mortal wounds. This is where you roll a dice for each model in your unit, and on a 4+, if they're within an inch of an enemy unit, so each model in your unit has to be within an inch. So as long as all 10 models are within an inch of another enemy unit model, then on a 4-up, on a 6-up, they'll take a mortal wound. You roll 10 dice for your unit of 10, and on 6s, they'll take a mortal wound. However, if you take them in Coalesced, it's going to be on 5s. If you're near your Realm Shaper engine, it's going to be on 4s, which is pretty good. If only there was something you could put in your army near your Realm Shaper engine that your opponent was desperate to charge and fight. I don't know, like a magical frog who's doing magical damage at range. Who knows, right? Who knows? Something like that would be really good. I don't know why. I really like the Saurus. We did the math on this earlier. We looked at the Kroxigors, which we haven't talked about yet. We talked about the Kroxigors, we talked about the Saurus, and we talked about the Lancers. The Lancers definitely do, it looks like they do more damage, but the Lancers don't take into account the fact that you do mortal wounds from the Jaws attacks after. So the Lancers are actually doing 14 damage, and the Saurus are doing 11.5. But they'll always add 3 mortal wounds on from the Jaws attacks. This is just from a unit of 10 versus 3 Lancers. So actually, you end up with 14 damage equal with the Saurus to the Lancers, so they basically do the same damage. And the reason that that's actually pretty important is that you get more wounds from the Saurus on a better save with better recursion because your rally is better. It's not higher than a 6. You just get more opportunities to roll it because more have died. So I think that's quite good. I quite like the Saurus Warriors myself personally. I think that they're pretty decent, but I'm interested to know what you all think. Saurus Guard are 130 points for 5 models. They've got 2 wounds each and a 3-up armor save. So slightly better than the Saurus Warriors, which is really nice, especially if you save stack with Mystic Shield, all-out defense, or cover. So they could be very survivable. They get +1 to charge from their musician, which is really nice, and +1 to run rolls, and they get +1 bravery, taking them up to bravery 10. 130 points for 5 for 10 wounds. Or if you reinforce them, it's going to be, to make it comparable with Saurus Warriors, it's 260 points for a unit of 10. For that, you basically just get +1 save. You don't get any better profile for the melee weapon, apart from its 2-inch range. 2 attacks, 3/3s, rend 1, damage 1, but it is a Celestine weapon, so you can add +1 rend to it, which is quite nice. And then they have the Selfless Protectors rule, which is effectively a bodyguard rule for heroes that are not a monster. Now, Saurus Guard are really good because what you really want to do with Saurus Guard is you want to use them near your Slann, your Kroak, and your other heroes, because they're just going to tank those wounds for them, pass the wounds off. You can read the rule there and how it works, but they're effectively going to save those very, very valuable units, and also maybe fight a little bit when people get near them. So Saurus Guard are very situational in some ways, because you got to ask yourself, do I actually think I'm going to lose my Kroak or my Slann to the enemy units? And if they are going to get you, then you take some Saurus Guard. If they're not, and you feel a bit like you want to risk it, you want to run the gauntlet, you're like, I don't care, no one's going to get near them, then maybe you don't take the Saurus Guard, which is quite cool. But they're a good unit in of themselves, but you take them to bodyguard unit. For 185 points, you can get yourself some Kroxigor Warspawned, or 175 points Swive points. You can get some Kroxigor, more like Kroxifor. if you take the Koatl's Claw subfaction, then you get to have these guys as battle line if you want. So you can have up to units of 9, because each of the Kroxigor units come in units of 3. And what do? They have the same profile though. Move 5 inches, 4 wounds, 4-up armor save, bravery 7. So both of them have it. And what's the difference between them two? Well, they're melee units. Simple. They fight well. Do they fight as well as the Aggradon Riders? Not quite. Can you buff them higher? Kind of. Let's talk about it. So they have Skink Guidance, which is an ability, which is the unit champion of Skink units can issue commands to this unit if this unit is wholly within 12 inches of a Skink unit. So if you run these guys along with some Skinks, then they can issue commands to them, which is kind of cool. Like they egg on their big brothers. They've got heavy scaled skin. This is on the Warspawned one specifically, which is subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made with missile weapons that target this unit. That's really nice, especially as we also know that you can also have -1 to this, -1 damage to this unit as well when you're in Coalesced. So -1 to wound, -1 damage. You can also make it so units that target them make them -1 to hit. So they can be quite survivable, which I think is really, really important. Like to note, we're going to be talking about these now, and you're going to see 12 wounds because it's a unit of 3 with 4 wounds each. Be really nice if there were 5, because then they could count as 2 on an objective. But the unit of 3 is like, oh, it's not survivable, and it probably isn't that survivable in the Starborne. But in Coalesced, that -1 damage is going to be super important, and then the -1 on the War Scroll to wound is also good. So you're going to be a little bit more punchy. Then you've got Spawn of Sotek. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic of this unit's melee weapons. If any models in a friendly Skink unit wholly within 12 inches unit have been slain in this phase, which I love, because you slay a skink near it, and they're like, no. But it happens to be in that phase, which means these guys get to strike after. Now, there obviously are ways with the Stegadon monstrous action to make units strike last. Get a bit of Kroak in there. Make units strike last is quite fun. But that means these strike before then. So then you wouldn't get the +1. I don't know when the activation happens, other than you build a screen of Skinks. So they're just less than 3 inches in front of your Kroxigor. The enemy charges them, and then you pile in with your Kroxigor, having freshly acquired a +1 to attack. That's a kind of nice way of doing that combo. And what do those attacks do? Well, if you're taking only a unit of 3, 2 of the models have got 3 attacks, 4s and 3s, Rend 2, damage 2, and then one of the models in there have a War Pick. And that's 3 attacks, 3s and 3s, Rend 2, damage 3. That's not a bad profile. Unfortunately, some of the attacks, well, over a third of the attacks, are going to be hitting on 4s. Because while you can give +1 to hit, you can't, there's lots and lots of armies that are also going to give you -1 to hit. So hitting on 4s is just atrocious for a melee unit. And they also don't have a fight twice ability like you would see on something like Chosen or Iron Guts. And Iron Guts are kind of in a similar position to this, but they start hitting on 3s, which I think is the important part to talk about. So they're all right, and you can stack some abilities on them to make them better. But as frontline battle troops, I'm not certain at the moment. And then talking about Kroxigor themselves, who actually do more output than the Warspawned, they've got a couple of other abilities. They get issued abilities by Skinks as well, thanks to Skink Guidance. They have Sweeping Blows, which is if the unmodified hit roll with a Drake Bite Maul is a 6, and the target, the unit it's targeting has got 10 or more models, then you score 2 hits on the target instead of 1. So they get Exploding 6s, but only on units with 10 or more models. So not a huge fan of that. That's kind of okay, but it's also kind of lame. So and you will forget that 100% of the time, in my opinion. And then you've got the Vice-like Jaws ability, and that's the kind of thing that ticks over the damage for both of these 2 units. Which is, after each time this unit fights, after all of its attacks have been resolved, pick one enemy within range, within 1 inch of these models, and you roll 3 dice. So your unit of 3 is going to get to roll 3 dice per model, so it's going to be 9 dice. Any 6s are a mortal wound. If you're in Coalesced, it's going to be any 5s or a mortal wound, which already means you're going to do 3 mortal wounds, which is quite nice. Or, if you're near your Realm Shaper, it's going to be 4s. So you're going to do 4 to 5 mortal wounds from unit 3, which is not nothing in each combat phase. But these boys have to stay alive. You don't necessarily have lots of healing in this book. You don't have lots of rallies in this book. So they're a unit that really survives on its own and its own abilities. Obviously, the -1 damage is going to be quite useful. But I'm not sure if they do enough damage to really be worth it. So they're Iron Guts that are -1 damage, and they do some mortals after combat. I wonder what everyone else thinks about these. These are ones that I'm not really convinced about, but here we go. The Stegadon is 300 points, and it's a monster. And if you do take in the Thunder Lizard sub-faction, it is going to be Battle Line, which is cool. You can have 3 of them. You can't reinforce them, so you can't have multiple Stegadons in a unit. But, thankfully, you're not going to want any of them, which is a positive, I guess. They're 14 wounds with a 4-up armor save, which is kind of okay. They have the Sky Street Bow. We talked about this earlier when we talked about the Skink Chief on Stegadon. 24-inch range, 3 shots that are damage 3. So if you were to take 3 Stegadons at 300 points, it's 900 points for your battle line, and they're going to do 9 shots that are damage 3. However, there are Alapexes out there in the world, and they do 4 shots that are damage D3 at 24 inches, and you can have tons of them, and their win rate is pretty much in the toilet. I would compare the Stegadon exactly to Stonehorn Beast Riders from the Ogre Moor tribes. They've even got this ability called the Skink War Party, which this unit counts as 10 models for the purposes of contesting objectives. They also get to add +1 to their save thanks to the Armoured Crest if models with 5 or less units with 5 or less models attack them, which is quite good because they got that 4-up save. But they don't have a ward save. They do mortal wounds on the charge, which we talked about before with the Skink Chief. They got the Sunfire Throater as well, and they add +3 to the bravery of Skinks around them. But they don't do mortal wounds on the charge like a Stonehorn. They don't have a 5-up ward save like Stonehorns. and they're not too dissimilarly priced. Stonehorns, the reason I mention it is because they actually win tournaments having a bunch of Stonehorn Beast Riders, not the Frostlord and Stonehorn. I'm not comparing them, but they're not quite the same. And in a book where there's loads of overlapping abilities, you don't actually have a lot of benefits to running monsters in this army versus a couple of like fringe cases. And everything really seems geared towards Kroxigor, Saurus, and some skink keywords. So I probably wouldn't take a Stegadon at all, but I'd love to see you run some, have some fun, run some monster trucks, fire all your Sky Street bows and do some charges, and have a great time. For 300 points, you can get Engine of the Gods. Well, this thing has had War Scrolls change over the years, and it is an incredibly weird piece, but very fun. 300 points. Let's talk about it. What is it? It's like a support melee unit. It's so weird. Right, it's got 14 wounds with a 4-up save, and it has some Stegadon-style combat profile. Don't need to go into it in too much detail, but it's kind of okay. It's got the +1 save against units with 5 or less models, the Armoured Crest ability. The main thing we're going to be talking about, though, is... it also does mortal wounds on the charge with the Unstoppable Stampede. It also adds +3 to the Bravery of Skink units around it. The important part here is the Cosmic Engine. Yeah, right? This is every person you've ever known who's been into stars, right? Very Libra of you. What does this do? In your shooting phase, you can say that this unit will either harness or reserve the power of the Cosmic Engine. If you say that it will harness the power, pick one of the effects below and generate the power by rolling 2d6. If you say it will reserve the power, then you can roll 1 additional dice the next turn. So turn 1, I can roll 2d6. Turn 2, if I don't roll any dice, I can roll 3d6. Turn 3, I can roll 4d6. Super simple. If I roll, anyway, you can work it out from there. It's pretty easy, okay? Can you save multiple dice on multiple Stegadons? The answer is yes. So, for example, not Stegadons, on Engine of the Gods. So I could have 2 Engine of the Gods, and I can elect not to do any abilities on turn 1, and they could both save a dice, which is pretty cool. Okay, then what do they get to pick? Then you pick an effect, and then you roll to see if it works. So the first one is Healing Light. On a 2 to 6, nothing happens. On a 7+, you heal D3 wounds allocated to each friendly Seraphon unit wholly within 6 inches. And this is kind of okay. But the real problem here is that it's wholly within 6 inches, so they have to be close to the Stegadon, which is all right. Bolts of Azure Energy, which is on a 2 to 8, this unit suffers 1 mortal wound. On a score of a 9, however, you pick 1 enemy unit within 24 inches of this unit and visible to it, roll a number of dice equal to the power score. So if you rolled, a 12, for each 4+, the enemy suffers a mortal wound. Now, this is quite fun, the idea of saving up till turn 5, where you'll be rolling 6d6 and just yeeting a ton of mortal wounds. But at that point, you've literally done nothing with it. Although it is still a combat monster, so it is going to fight stuff. Time Slows is the next ability, which on a 2 to 10, this unit itself suffers D3 mortal wounds. However, if you roll 11 or more until the end of the turn, the Strike First effect applies to friendly Seraphon units wholly within 6 inches of this model. Again, it's wholly within 6 inches. Strike First, which is a good ability, but I'm going for no, so we're going to move on. Starlight Summons. On a power score of 2 to 12, this unit suffers 3 mortal wounds. So you're going to need a lot of dice to make sure this goes off. 3 dice when you roll it has a statistical average of 10.5, so we're rolling that up to an 11. So you aren't, on average, going to do this with 3 dice. So you're going to have to maybe wait till turn 3 to do this. But on a 13+, you can summon 1 Saurus Warrior unit of 10 models or 1 Skink cohort of 20 models to the battlefield. The summoned unit must be set up wholly within 6 inches of this unit and more than 9 inches from all enemy units, which is crazy. Let's absolutely go. 10 Saurus Warriors. So now we're just going to take 3 Engine of the Gods for 900 points. And then at turn 4, we're going to summon 600 points worth of Saurus Warriors. But there's a problem with that. We would have lost the game. So the Engine of the Gods is a really interesting piece. It's a buff piece. It does some interesting stuff. It's got a really fun, gnarly mechanic. Are you ever going to take one? Probably not, but it's pretty interesting and you can do some really fun stuff with it. And doing fun stuff in a game is literally why we all play, so there you go. As it's important that I go through all of the units in this book, I think it's important to mention the Terrawings exist, and they're a unit of 3 for 75 points, but just don't get them, is my TLDR, unless you like the models, in which case you're a weirdo. That's the Terrawing section of the review. Oh my god. Do you love turtles as much as I love turtles? Welcome to the Bastiladon. There are 2 Bastiladons. There's a Bastiladon with a solar engine, which is a shooting gun platform tank tortoise, or there's the Bastiladon with the Arc of Sotek, which is like drowning someone in snakes, right? There's loads of bonuses from how the Bastiladon used to be versus how it is now. It used to be maybe better, but it's definitely not bad now, which is amazing. It doesn't bracket, and it's a monster, and those things are good. That means that its 12 wounds on a 2-up armor save are going to maintain that 2-up armor save for the entire time. So both versions of Bastiladon are incredibly survivable. 2-up armor save, 12 wounds, and could be near an Astrolith banner bearer, obviously for a 6-up or 5-up ward save. So what do? Well, if you're going to go for the solar engine, which is the shooting version, which is the way more expensive version, it's 265 points. It shoots 24 inches and it moves 5 for an effective 29 inches. And it's got 3 attacks, hit on 3s, wound on 3s, rend 3, damage 3. And then it feels only right to take 3 of them. Then it's all 3s. You never have to ask yourself any questions. 3s. No, it's potentially 9 damage at 29 inches, which is okay. The problem is, it's just okay. But that's great, because previously it was stupid. You used to be able to shoot twice. It had more attacks. This shoots more effectively. It hits on a 3 now, which is quite nice. It can't shoot twice now, which is a massive positive for the game, because it's pointed fairly reasonably, in my opinion, for 265 points. It's got an okay combat profile with 3 attacks, doing D3 damage. So it's a tank that can get into a fight, and it can shoot at range, which is legitimately a threat at Ren 3. Legitimately a threat for many big miniatures or strong units in the game. However, the Arc of Sotek version, which is the melee version, which has the same combat profile for the bludgeoning tail, has a different ability called the Arc of Sotek, which has 20 attacks until it's wounded, until it's dead. So even it didn't bracket, it used to bracket, so it doesn't bracket now, so it's just 20 attacks all the time, and it's only 200 points for the Arc of Sotek version, right? So this is 4s and 3s, no rend damage 1, which sounds rubbish, I know, but it does 6s. It does mortal wounds on 6s to hit, and you got 20 dice, so you're going to do 3 mortal wounds in combat. Now that isn't a lot, and you might roll loads more 6s, which is really, really good. However, the really awesome thing is if you take 4. Is this something I suggest you do? Absolutely not. But is it cool? Yes. You take them in Coalesced. Don't forget as well, if you take them in Coalesced, they're also going to be -1 damage to a minimum of 1. So even if you hit them with a damage 2 weapon, they're still just going to be -1 damage. So you can make these guys very survivable. Anyway, back to having 4 turtles, because it's cool. You have 4 of them, you charge them in. It's going to be 80 attacks. 8-0. With any 6s to hit, doing mortal wounds. That's something like 18 mortal wounds that you're going to be doing to the enemy, which is really cool. It is 800 points, which is crazy. Now, if you really want to stack it up, you take the Skink Starpriest and you make it so they do 6s to wound, do a mortal wound as well. 4 Skink Starpriests. You could use them like little pet handlers behind 4 Skink Starpriests behind 4 Bastiladons. Is this a good list? Absolutely not. Is it a great list? Absolutely yes. Right? Fantastic. The Bastiladons, I think some people are going to be upset about them. Yeah, the shit ton of snakes build. A classic build. Yeah, a classic list. And I would encourage you to try it out because it's very cool. Those are the Bastiladons. I would rate them as a yes. Fun, not necessarily top end, but fun, which is cool. Finally, how to win with Seraphon. Well, they have their own grand strategies, which you write on your army list, and battle tactics, which you do in the game to score points. let's talk about them. The grand strategies, you have Realm Shaper Guardians, which is when the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if you have a Coalesced Realm Shaper engine or Starborne Realm Shaper engine on the battlefield, and there are no enemy models within 12 inches, and is not affected by successful smash to rubble. So basically, just keep your Realm Shaper alive, which is pretty nice, and there are no enemy models within range. Okay, like, probably not, because that's quite risky, but I guess if you've got little wizards nearby, maybe. You've got Repel Corruption. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if there are no enemy units within your territory. You can't guarantee that, so don't pick that. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if at least one friendly Seraphon unit wholly within each large quarter of the battlefield. This is actually quite cool, because you can just put one model right in the middle, and that'll be for all 4, so that seems like a good one. The final one is Further the Great Plan. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if you completed 4 or more battle tactics, and each of those battle tactics were made from the March of the Seraphon host table below. So, let's go and look at those, shall we? The battle tactics from March of the Seraphon host. Pick 3 different friendly Seraphon monsters. You complete this tactic if each of those units runs in the following movement phase and finishes that run within 6 inches of at least one other unit you picked and wholly within enemy territory. So this is if you can take loads of monsters. I don't encourage you to do that in this game. Oh, unless you're taking 4 Bastiladons. Yeah. Celestial Obliteration. Pick 1 enemy unit on the battlefield. You complete this tactic if that unit is destroyed this turn by mortal wounds caused by spells or abilities of an endless spell. You're probably going to pick that because you're going to cast a bunch of spells. But it has to be endless spells. Okay? But I think you can make that happen. Overwhelming numbers. Pick 1 objective controlled by the enemy. You complete this tactic at the end of the turn if you control that objective, and all friendly units contesting it have the skink keyword. This is very good if you're taking Starborne and you want to have a bunch of skinks running around. Apex Predator, pick 1 enemy monster. You complete this tactic if that at the end of this turn that enemy unit was destroyed by an attack made by friendly Seraphon monster. Again, you've got to take monsters here. So that's how you're going to score points, by running monsters, but the monsters feel like the weaker part of the book. Cold-Blooded Resilience, pick 1 friendly Saurus or Kroxigor unit within 3 inches of an enemy unit. Complete this tactic at the end of this turn if that unit was not destroyed, did not retreat, and was not removed from the battlefield. So they can't retreat in your turn, which is pretty nice. That's good. Not destroying them is a bit of an issue, in my opinion. So that's going to be one of those situations where you end up in a long, protracted fight, but you get to choose those, which is quite nice. And then finally, Pack Hunters, pick 1 enemy unit within 3 inches and only 1 friendly Aggradon unit. You complete this tactic if, at the end of the turn, that unit is within 3 inches of 2 or more friendly Aggradon units. So this is kind of a weird mix of battle tactics. They want you to take monsters, they want you to take Skinks, they want you to take Kroxigor, and or Kroxigosaurus, or they want you to take Aggradons, and you can't mix and match. It's a bit like the Stormcast Eternal ones, where they very much focus on dragons and not the other portion of your army. So it feels like some of these won't be available to you, which is pretty tough. But I don't think that's overly going to matter, because you're just literally going to nuke the entire enemy off the board with Kroak and some of his spells, which is pretty fun. And I guess you could summon these, actually, thinking about it. If you're running Starborne, you can summon all of these units on the board, right? You can summon all these units, so you could maybe do those tactics by just summoning the units to do the tactics. Pretty interesting. Right, if I was going to go play Seraphon, this is something I've not put in previous videos, so I'm going to put in this video now. If I was going to go get Seraphon this week, what would I go and pick up, and why? This is one of those things. Okay, I think looking at it, I really want to run Saurus. I think they're really cool. Maybe a Oldblood on foot. I think I could do some really fun stuff with that, and it'd be quite engaging. I think that's really good. And I think definitely the Skink Starseer is very good because he turns off wards. I'd definitely go for that. Skink Starpriest as well, to make it so that they do more, which is really, really fun. But ultimately, when you look at it, there's so much raw output that comes from Kroak, who's incredibly cheap, or comes from the Slann as well, and all that combination, that it's really tough not to immediately want to move towards that. So they feel like they're on the list as well. It is a book of 2 halves. It's written like a book of 2 halves. But you read the Coalesced stuff and you think, wow, that's really cool. I really like that. That's fun. All the Saurus, all that interaction. There's a lot happening there. But then you're just going to watch someone with a couple of frogs blasting people off the board, and that's going to be very, very fun as well. So, and some of the new units are really fun. They're quite interesting. Like, I would maybe pick up a couple of Spawn of Chotec and run them with some Saurus because of the minor saves, and then do some additional rend. I think that's fun. That's quite engaging. You could do some fun stuff with that portion. But for me, I'd start with Kroak. I'd get a Slann. I'd get a Starseer. The Starseer, yeah. I'd get the Starpriest as well, probably, which is a bunch of characters. I would pick up, then I would pick up some Skinks, and I would maybe pick up some. I think Saurus are so unique. I think Saurus I'd put in with Saurus. So I would maybe pick up some Saurus if I was planning on going that way. And I quite like the idea of running the very, very cheap Raptadon Riders or the new Skink Cavalry. I'd run the Skink Cavalry and I'd run them with Skink Priests because they're quite fun and they do a lot of attacks, which is pretty fun. Yeah, the Raptadon Chargers are very good. Those are the ones. So I think that they're quite a fun thing to pick up, and they are in the launch box. You get the Slann in the launch box, and you also get the Raptadon Riders in the launch box. So I think I'd pick those up as well. So that's what I'd go for. So those are the combos. And those are the units I'd pick up. Other than that, I really hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it as a podcast, if you listen to it as a podcast. And I want to thank the Twitch chat for being here for this 8.5 hour stream. Oh, yes. Sorry. Good point. We should definitely get the Astrolith Banner Bearer. Auto buy. The Astrolith Banner Bearer is an auto buy. The terrain feature, Astrolith Banner Bearer, Kroak, Slann, Skink on a chair. Those are your autos. Get some Raptadon Riders, right? Which I think is good. In the launch box, you do not build each of the Raptadons, in my opinion. You build just the Raptadon Chargers. So I hope that answers that question. So the launch box will be good, which is nice. If you've enjoyed the show, then you can always support the show by joining our Patreon, The Honest Wargamer, subscribing on Twitch, or generally just letting people know that there's video, which I hope is good. Simply put. Thanks very much for listening. Hope you have a really lovely day. Hope you really enjoy your new armies and enjoy Seraphon and don't listen to the haters. Ciao for now.